order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
Let's take a moment to remember the 14 police officers we lost since the last board meeting.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a full agenda this evening, and just as a reminder, as I was reminded by the technology unit of our district, is that please speak clearly and strongly into the mic. Know that our mics are set at the highest ability to record the slightest of sounds, and that includes striking of keyboards. So if it sounds like there is a jackhammer in the background, that's what that noise is. Also, our video camera is on. It is facing us, and so anytime that the camera is facing us and that blue light is on, we are on video. And the video extends from, if you all look to your right, that red fire alarm, all the way to the audience where the far right seat is, and everything inside that. So just know that in order to provide a good product to our community out there, those are the parameters that we're working into. Okay. With that said, welcome everyone, and our first item on the agenda is our regular business meeting, public forum. John, do we have any requests to speak?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Therefore, there is no responses to those. Our next item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the January 8, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Item number 2, the February 14th, 2019 special meeting minutes are not ready. Is that correct? Okay, and therefore I will ask that those are stricken from the consent agenda. With that in mind, when I say stricken, what I mean is that they will be provided in next month's consent agenda. With that in mind, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Yeah, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, consent agenda motion is approved. Next item on the agenda is the financial report and updates. Finance Director Gabe Boldra.
Mr. Chair, and if may I ask the board if we allow the auditor to go first and present the audit and the CAFR.
Yes, I will do that. That is item number 3, I believe. We'll move up to the first point of discussion. So with that, discussion possible action, which is review and approval of the fiscal year 2017-18 audit and the CAFR, which is the comprehensive annual financial report, is now up, and our auditor is on board. And just so as everybody is aware, legal counsel could not be here tonight. They are here telephonically and will be able to be addressed or have questions asked of him at that point. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Soto, and members of the board. Thank you for having me here tonight. It's my pleasure to present the results from the fiscal year 2018 audit. My name is Jay Park, and I'm from the firm of Walker and Armstrong. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through, at a high level, the results of the 2018 audit. So a lot of information in the audit report. It's over 50 pages long, and in fact it grew substantially from the prior year. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It is a much larger report this year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about really 3 different documents And I've summarized the results of these 3 documents in a PowerPoint presentation. I think that's going to be a little bit easier for everybody to go through and understand at a higher level the results of the audit. With that being said, before we get going on the PowerPoints, you should have 3 documents. You have a large document that looks something like this. It has a nice picture on the front. Beautiful picture. That's your comprehensive annual financial report. You have a second document that is just a couple pages long. It's bound there. And that's the report on internal control. Okay.
Yep, internal controls. Yep, here you go.
And then you have a third document. It's actually a letter, so it's not bound. It's actually stapled with something like this. Okay. So, I wasn't going to go through all 3 documents in a lot of detail. Like I said, we've got a PowerPoint presentation that kind of walks through some of the highlights. So, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start walking through the presentation here. Okay. There we go. Summary of audit results. Okay, so when you hire auditors, our job is to come in and see if we can express an opinion on the financial statements. Okay? So our deliverable is a 3-page report that's in the large packet. We call that the independent auditor's report. Okay, so that's really what you're hiring. The main thing you're hiring an audit firm to do is issue that report. And in that report, we state whether or not the financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with the accounting rules. We call it generally accepted accounting principles. So, item number 1 there, we put it as a first item because it's the most important item, which is we're rendering an unmodified or a clean opinion on the financial statements. So that means that the financial statements, that big package, is presented in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, in our opinion. Okay? So, congratulations to the districts. That is the type of opinion that most organizations covet to obtain. Okay. So let's talk about some of the highlights of the 2018 audit. First and foremost, I mentioned that your report is a lot larger this year. It's larger because it's actually a slightly different report. It's something we call a comprehensive annual financial report. All right? So I'd like to congratulate the district in terms of taking the effort to prepare this type of report. A comprehensive annual financial report is the highest level of financial reporting that governments can issue. That report goes to an organization we call the GFOA. They review the report, they grade it, we get the results, and if they have any recommendations, they list it out in a letter back to the district. What's really important about this.
Mr. Walker, if I may, if you want to put that mic on the table in front of you, that way you're speaking more into the mic.
Good idea. Oh yeah, that's much better.
It's helpful.
Okay, so the GFOA is going to review the CAFR, and they will hopefully issue an award. So in my experience, I've worked on a lot of CAFRs over the years, and my clients have always received these awards. Okay, so it's the highest level of recognition that you can get in terms of governmental financial reporting. This is the first year Sedona Fire District is doing this CAFR. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that the report's a lot larger than it was in prior years, because we've included something called the transmittal letter, as well as a statistical section that's towards the back. Okay, there's about, I would say 12 pages in back that we call the statistical section. Okay, so in terms of overall financial condition, I'd like to point out a few things. If we could take a look at, let's take a look at page 11. I've got it highlighted here. You'll notice where we have the district's assets exceeded its liabilities and something we call deferred inflows by $1.5 million. What that means is that that's a positive number, and so you have what we refer to as a positive net position or positive net worth, okay? That is important because, as with many large governments that are participating in PSPRS, you have a pension obligation, Okay? Some of our clients have pension obligations that are so large that it's throwing their net position into a deficit. Yours is not a deficit. Okay? Your obligation is still large. It's over $23 million. But you're strong enough in terms of your cash position and your fixed assets, capital assets, just your overall liquidity, is strong enough where you still have a positive net position. Okay?
That's good.
That is good, okay? So pensions are larger obligations, and it's certainly going to take resources in future years. But one of the things that I notice in looking at your financial statements is your cash balance. At the top of page 11, your cash investments, $6.7 million is a healthy balance, okay? If I take that number and I divide it by your total expenditures, you're over 40%, okay? That's really strong. In terms of other fire districts that we work with, you're on the upper level in terms of liquidity strength with that cash balance, okay? On the presentation, governmental funds, if you could, please go to page 13.
I would just like to comment that on that cash, that very excellent cash balance, that I wouldn't want the public to think that we're just, putting money aside. It's actually designated for future capital needs. Just would like to make sure.
The listing audience.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd like to make a point on that, because if we look at page 13, you'll see where we have a committed balance of $4.3 million that is committed for capital projects, okay? And so I absolutely, in terms of financial reporting, that's showing up in your financial statements as well, which is that money, a large portion of that money is committed for a specific purpose, okay? But you're responsible, so you still keep $2 million in your general fund as well, which is shown there as unassigned fund balance to meet your future obligations in the following year. So this is the balance sheets, governmental funds. It's a little bit different than the previous statement because it shows more detail. You can see here the general fund, which is your operating fund. We have the capital projects, which is specific for future capital projects, capital outlays. We have special projects as well as the grant funds. So as noted on the presentation, if you look over also to page 15, we have a net increase in fund balance. I'm looking to the right-hand column towards the bottom. You're going to see a line that says net change in fund balances of $1.1 million, okay? And that's also the third bullet there on the presentation. So overall revenues exceeded expenditures to the tune of over $1 million. That leaves us with an ending combined fund balance of just under $6.9 million. Moving on in the presentation, bullet point 3, key financial performance measures. Net position increased during the year by $168,000. Cash and investments increased by just under $1 million. And total liabilities had an increase of about $2.3 million. Most of that increase is because of your net pension obligation change, okay, during the year. So you didn't go out and borrow no new debt, no new capital leases. You're actually paying down your existing debt. So most of that is because of your pension obligation.
Right.
Starting on page 17, we move into the notes to the financial statements. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this section. It goes on for many pages. The majority of what's in here is pension related. There's probably about 20 pages that just relates to pensions. I'm just going to point out a couple things that I think are really critical for you to understand for this year. Over on page 21, we have note 2, which is a beginning balance restated. This is restated for the implementation of a new accounting standard. And so we had something called GASB Statement number 75, and what that did is it brought on additional obligations for what we call other post-employment benefits. Okay, And so that's a new standard effective for this year. Over on page 23, just real quick, capital assets, note 6 shows the change in capital assets during the year. And over on page 24, we have changes in long-term liabilities. I mentioned earlier that the biggest change related to your net pension obligation. You'll see that towards the top of page 24. There's a table under note 7. And there's something called the net pension or OPEB liability for $3.8 million. Okay, that's why your liabilities, primary reason your liabilities increased during the year. All right. Okay, so I'm going to switch back for a little bit here to the presentation. Before I do, I'd like to refer you real quick to page 45. This is called the statistical section. And this is included this year, was not included in prior year. This is part of the information that's required for a CAFR. Okay, this information goes to the GFOA. They're going to review it and make sure it meets their requirements, their standards. Some good information in here. A lot of it is financial trends. So you'll see over on page 46, you can look at your asset balances and your liabilities, and it goes back 10 years. So James Vincent Group did a really nice job of pulling this information together by going back and looking at prior year's audits. So that's what that information is. So there's a lot of information in here, so it goes on for several pages. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to point it out since it's new this year. There's some good information as it relates to your district. Okay, moving back to the presentation here. Internal controls. We did not have any internal control findings as part of our 2018 audit. So we do a lot of work looking at your processes, your internal controls over the cash receipt cycle, billing cycle, accounts payable, payroll, and we didn't have any what we call significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. We did spend extra time this year looking at credit cards. We've been doing that a lot with our clients. We sampled 30 transactions. Because it's been there tends to be a problem with credit cards. I'm pleased to say that the work we did not result in any exceptions in our work. We sampled 30. Okay, financial position. We've actually already covered a lot of this just by going through the comprehensive annual financial report here. But you can see this is a summary change from prior year. Total assets and deferred outflows increased by just under $2.5 million. Your non-current liabilities, $3.4 million. Again, $2.3 million that is your net pension obligation increase. Positive balance of just under $1.6 million. What are your assets comprised of? Cash investments, $6.7 million. Quite a bit in capital assets. That's not unusual for our fire district. So that's 60% of your total assets. And then we have other assets, which is comprised of receivables and prepaids of $1.1 million. Liabilities, $23 million is net pension and OPEB obligations. The OPEB is coming on new this year, GASB statement number 75. Compensated absences at 1.6. Compensated absences is accrued unpaid vacation. Okay. Capital leases of just under $1.4 million. That went down. That's a decrease of over $400,000 from prior year. And then we've got everything else as other liabilities. Accounts payable, accrued liabilities, $762,000. Revenues, taxes revenues went up just under $1.2 million. Charges for services, that's primarily ambulance fees, $3.3 million, and wildland is in there as well. So we've got total of $17.6 million compared to $16 million in the prior year. Good year. Expenditures, we went back several years. You can see 2018. What we did is we aggregated expenditures by major categories. As with most districts, the majority of your expenditures are for salaries and wages and employee benefits. So you can see the trend there. And so the bar to the right-hand side is 2018. And so as you go back, we're going back several years to 2014. Okay. So you can see that salaries and wages, employee benefits, that's gradual. Employee benefits is going up a little bit more, primarily because of pension-related costs. Your capital outlays are decreasing. You can see that in 2014, you had capital outlays of over $3 million, and then for 2018, it's just over $500,000. And then other expenditures are staying pretty consistent over the 5-year period. Here's the detail of that information. Looking at 2018 compared to 2017. So salaries and related, that's your biggest increase at just under $1.2 million. Capital outlays decreased $540,000, primarily for equipment. Okay, and the last area that I'm going to cover, what we refer to as the required communications, that's the letter that's stapled, okay? And I've summarized it here. What I'm going to do is just focus on some of the highlights. So there are certain things that auditors are required to communicate to governance, to the board, and so I've summarized those here. A couple of things I'd like to point out. Item number 3, difficulties encountered in performing the audit. The audit went well this year. We got everything we requested in a timely manner. Management was excellent to work with, so we don't have anything to report there. We didn't have any disagreements with management about any financial or accounting matters. Okay, so that part of the audit went well. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We did have some audit corrections. If you want to look at those are going to be included in the packet. Okay, that's not unusual for auditors to come out and propose audit adjustments. So we did have those. We summarized those here. We had some corrections, capital leases, accumulated depreciation, net pension obligation, and revenues. We have one item that we wanted to point out during the course of our testing of the payroll cycle. We noted that there were background checks that weren't always in the file for 6 of 25 employees. So our recommendation is to go back through and check your personnel files and make sure that those background checks are in there. Okay.
Could you just say a few more words about that? I didn't quite.
Yes, absolutely.
Expand
So in Title 48, there's a requirement to have background checks for all employees. Okay, it's actually in 2 places in that statute. And so one of the things that we do is we check for that. There's no requirement for us to specifically test for that, but we usually do just in case there's any that are missing. And so during the course of our testing, we noted that there were 6 missing. Six employees, 6 of 25 tested did not have. At least we could not locate them. It doesn't say that they don't exist. We just couldn't see them in the files. Okay.
Were you able to ascertain whether they were civilian or sworn personnel?
I did look at that. It looked like it was a combination. Yes.
And what does the background check look into? They're just like a security clearance type background?
Yes, Chief Coyle.
Yeah, so it was the background checks that we have to do when we get hired. It was interesting because because Jay and I were sharing an office during that time. So as we went to find out what was going on and how we could get them, DPS gets rid of them. They have statutory requirements. They only keep them, the fingerprints and the background checks, until such time as they provide a clean background, and then they get rid of them. So it put us in an odd position because the standard stuff they were referring to said that the background checks needed to be completed. And DPS, the one that did the background checks, doesn't keep the documents, especially far back as some of them. I'll tell you, one of them was me. So, so 21 years back, they did not keep that. So that's kind of where we're at.
They don't have to be renewed or rechecked into?
No, that's not. It just says it's supposed to be done. And so there's also that whole pre-employment versus, post-employment background checks.
Yes.
And I'll talk when I do the chief's report a little bit about something that we're looking at doing relative to HR to address some of these issues, because this was one of the things we picked up on that we wanted to clean up, but we're not quite sure how to do it yet.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, that concludes my presentation. What I'd like to do is open it up to any questions that you may have.
Since I'm new here, the construction of the fire station, Station 6, how is that financially reported? And as it's paid off the lease for Station 6. How is that documented in a financial report? Is it a liability? Is it?
So, yeah, so, you know, how Jay had mentioned, you know, the total assets the district has. So obviously the acquisition cost of that station and the land and the building is all listed on our balance sheet as an asset. And then he talked about kind of our long-term liabilities and some of those being lease obligations. And that's where the lease obligation, the remaining debt balance on that Station 6 is reported.
So you'll see that over on page 24. It's under obligations under capital leases. There's a line, there's a column that says balance as of June 30th, 2018. And there's an outstanding obligation of it's $1,362,720.
So that's what's left to be paid on that lease.
That's a combination of that lease and I believe the Stryker Gurney lease as well.
That's right. That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Quick question in reference to what Al is asking. It's not called out individually within this report, but I'm sure within the budget itself, it's probably line itemed and identified there.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And I just want to say it's really gratifying to get such an exceptional report. This is an exceptional report that you've given us. So thank you for all the work you've done in making sure that we're keeping all our obligations and doing them well. Really appreciate that, and want to thank staff as well, because I know it's you all that made this exceptional report happen.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to point out that, you know, I have to present a lot of audits, and sometimes the news that I have to present is not always great news, a lot of findings, and so it's really enjoyable to be able to present such a good audit, because I don't always do that.
So you're saying we're a pleasure to work with?
You are a pleasure to work with, yes. Good job.
Now, if I may, unless, Gene, you had anything to comment on?
No, really, I just reiterate what Corey said and what have you, for the benefit of our watching, listening audience, what have you. We just got an A.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to point out that a lot of hard work goes into this. And as a board member, having the privilege of being the selected board member to sit in on the audit, which is always a privilege to be questioned by an auditor, was painless. Because obviously we had all the transparency in the world and had nothing to hide. And so all we could tell you is what we know and to be true, and the results are obvious here in the report. On page 50 of your report, it's the assessed and estimated actual value of taxable property. I was kind of intrigued by the fact that it describes taxable assessed value across the city of Sedona from 2009 through 2018, and it shows a correlation between the assessed value and the mill rate and how it can fluctuate as one goes up, the other may go down or may hold steady, or even may go up. It just depends what our needs are. And this is a clear indicator of how the market has affected that.
Yes.
And it's something that we will be looking at very closely in the up and coming budget once we establish our mill rate based on what our needs are. So this makes it easy. Lastly, from my point of view, is also being the chair on the PSPRS board, your explanation of the various tiers in the pension system, I would not think that I would find them here in an annual report. I would think they'd be found somewhere else, but lo and behold, they're here in clear detail that is understood, and they're not so technical that you're gonna pull your hair out. So I appreciate having it in there. I know where they're at now, so.
Excellent.
But all in all, to all the staff, JVG, throughout the year, putting things together, to Walker Armstrong for putting this together, it makes our job, it's our grade, it's our reward for seeing that. And to the community of Sedona, you know, we're doing the right things, and it's obvious in a report like this. So thank you, and the
Chairman.
staff. That's all I have. Anything else? Nope. Thank you very much. Very
Okay,
good report.
thank you. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Okay, with that said, and again, thank you very much, Mr. Park. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is discussion, possible action, review, and approval of the December 2018 and January 2019 finance reports.
Mr. Chair, before we do that, could we get a acceptance on the audit?
Thank you. Okay, so with the annual audit for 2018 and the CAFR report, I need a motion for approval of the audit.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll show that the 2018 audit is approved. And with that, Gabe, yeah, I got you. Gabe, you're on. Thank you. Sure. Yes, that was very rewarding. I think we're all guilty of the pounding.
Yeah, it's up there, yeah. With our chief now using a PowerPoint, it's messing up my flow. Okay, so Mr. Chair, members of the board, you have actually the December and January financial report. Given the relevance, if it's the pleasure of the board, I'll just move on to the January report, but the December report is in there for your review and your knowledge, your review, but I'll move on to the January report if that's okay with the board.
It is, although I believe there needs to be a motion to approve
Approve both reports,
both.
correct?
So approve them all at once, or you want one
Yeah,
or the other?
your preference.
Let's just go ahead and we'll do them all together for those two.
Okay, perfect. Included in the packet is the January financial report that we'll present on specifically. Starting off with our tax levy revenue for the month, you'll see we brought in $922,878 in property tax revenue. We were slightly under our projection by $64,000 for the month. Again, that's kind of a function of timing. We don't usually know the exact amount on our property tax revenue. What we do is we look at our historical collection rates and the percentage of collection month over month, and use that to predict what our anticipated revenue is going to be for that month. On the non-tax revenue side, we received $162,910. We were under budget by about $39,000, and that's related to predominantly to ambulance revenue. Not a very big variance. In fact, when we get to year-to-date numbers, you'll see from a year-to-date standpoint, we're actually in a really strong position on our non-levy revenue side. Our total expenses for the month were $1,109,000. Our budget was $1,278,000. So we were under budget for total expenses by $169,000. Personnel was over slightly due to healthcare benefit costs and that was over by $19,000. Buildings and land was under budget by $25,000. Our vehicles and equipment is under by $43,000. Communications was under by $42,000, and that's mainly due to timing of expenses. And then managerial expenses under by $78,000, and that's again due to timing of some management-related expenses. Year to date, you'll see our total revenues are $11,800,000, $17. As I mentioned before, we are kind of projecting over what our budget. Our budget is $11,600,000. Our tax revenue is actually lagging behind. We're about $177,000 short of our budgeted tax revenue for this point year to date. It's not an issue. We still anticipate collecting the full amount of revenue. It's just a function of timing, and being off from those historical averages. The non-levy revenue side, though, as I mentioned before, is at 1.7 million, which is actually 300,000 over what our budget is, and that's predominantly due to wildland and ambulance revenue. Total expenses at 8.8 million, which is 498,000 under budget. Personnel, as you saw for the month, is also over about that same amount year to date. And really it's the same reasoning. It's healthcare timing on healthcare benefits. And one of the big things is we pre-fund the HSA accounts, and so we continue to see that overage month over month till we get towards the end of the year where that balances out. Buildings and land, we came in 159,094, which is under budget by 141,000. Vehicles and equipment was under budget by 186,000. You see kind of on that timing function on communications and IT, as we get to the year-to-date number, we're more in line and closer to budget. And then managerial is still trending under by 102,000. So our total, total performance from this point year-to-date is strong. Despite some issues on the property tax revenue side, it's a function of timing, and we will see that money. We have a very high collection percentage in Sedona, so we do see the revenue. I have some clients that we actually have to budget a delinquency because they have a lot of residents not pay their taxes, but we have a very high collection rate here, so I don't anticipate any issues on that. Percentage of budget expended. We're through 6 months, and we've expended 52% of the budget with 48% remaining. Our percentage of expenses, as kind of following up with what Jay said, like most fire districts, personnel is the highest expense at 85%, followed by operations at 9% and managerial at 6%. One thing I will point out is, districts that are in the excess of 90% of their expenses being personnel are ones that usually get themselves into more financial difficulties because that is a large expense that fluctuates a lot year over year. As you guys remember, some of the impacts we've had with the PSPRS and other things. So if that expense is a large percentage of your overall budget, you lose the ability to fund other programs. So we have a good percent overall.
So even though it's only 5% different, we're at 85%, you feel that is still healthy?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And then finally, cash position year over year. And you'll see we ended the month with 9.2 million compared to 5.7 million last year. So we are up by about 3.5 million. One thing to kind of note about that number, though, is if you remember again last year, we had almost $1 million payout in PSPRS related lawsuit payments. And so that obviously affects the timing on our cash balance because not only did we have that payout last year, we then, after that credit was used up, we were starting to pay on to PSPRS again. So I still anticipate us growing our fund balance by the end of the year. But as you can see, we're, that overage right there, I anticipate us only growing the overall fund balance by about 700,000 for the year. So that, although it looks really good right now, it's still going to be positive, but just not as big of a number as we're looking at right there. So unless there's any other questions about the report, I have a few other things, just update the board on the finance side. So I'll go and let you ask any questions on the report first.
I do have one question in regards to revenues from wildland fires.
Yes.
Do you anticipate any delay in payment from the federal government as a result of the shutdowns and status that they were in the beginning of the year?
We have seen delays in payment already, and I anticipate hopefully we receive the monies before the end of the fiscal year. There has been periods of time where districts haven't received the money before the end of the fiscal year, but we are delayed, but hopefully we do get those funds soon.
Is the delay due to the federal part of it or to the state part of it?
Yes, so if you remember, was it 2 years ago? The state set aside a fund to pay departments within the state quicker. So instead of waiting for reimbursement from the federal government, they dispersed the funds immediately or quickly after being invoiced. And I mean, we're seeing payments within 2 weeks to 30 days from being invoiced versus our typical 90 to 6 to 8 to 9 months. Unfortunately, though, all those funds have been expended. So now at this point, the state is purely on a we get paid when they get paid basis.
And
Everything
do we
got you.
get paid fairly rapidly after they get paid? I'm talking about the state. Once the state
Right.
receives the federal funds, do they send it along? In a week or two?
Well, it depends on who you ask. So I'll tell you the way it's supposed to, it's supposed to work is that the orders, so once a bill is submitted and it goes through their approval process, it's what the state calls a clean bill. And so that date that you have a clean bill, the oldest clean bill is supposed to be paid first whenever they receive new monies. That's the way that it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, there was an opportunity to increase that fund during the last, when the governor presented his budget, there wasn't money in there to increase that fund. So if that fund's going to be increased to allow for that time that it's taken for that money to be received to not be borne by the districts and everything that are providing the service, then there's going to have to be a different alternative to the governor's proposed budget because it wasn't in there.
So should we be preparing for any kind, let's just say worst case scenario, Plan B, if those funds don't come in by the end of fiscal? Do we have a Plan B to take
Yes.
care of whatever?
Yeah, so what will happen is, I mean, the district has more than enough funds to be able to cover any operating expenses, anything like that. So we won't be in any cash shortage issue. But what will happen if those funds don't come in before the end of the fiscal year is we will record as we have recorded the receivable, showing that we're waiting on those funds. But what will have to happen as part of our closing entries for the books at the end of the next year or the end of this year, if we don't receive it within 60 days after the year end, we have to take that revenue off our books. And we record it as what's called deferred revenue, which is revenue that we said we were going to get that we didn't get. So,
And then when we finally do get it, it becomes part of the next fiscal year's budget as revenues.
correct.
Okay.
Well, it will become part of the budget, but because we won't budget that money coming in because it's already been accounted for. But what we will do is we then will account for that money on our financial statements then as additional revenues in that period. So,
FYI, I believe that, and probably the chief's aware of this, other fire districts, what have you, are banding together, what have you, and challenging the state on this issue. So we should probably keep our ears open on that.
Yeah, Mr. McCarthy, that's correct. And one of the other hats I wear is the Wildland Committee representative for the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association, and there's some fire districts that have chosen to not send out any other resources. There's other ones that are saying that they're not going to, and I'm trying to work with the state to figure out a way to correct this quickly because really the state of Arizona doesn't have a fire department outside of the fire districts that they provide. They have minimal ability to respond, and it's a good cooperative agreement when all the parts are working well. Just trying to help them get the parts to work a little bit better because you're right. Some people that aren't in the same cash position, they're the same position that we are. They suffer whenever they don't get those monies back, and they have to stop letting people go out, and which it's a big snowball effect. Because does that mean that those incidents get bigger because of it? I don't know. It could be, but it certainly can present even larger problems. So I'll be definitely keeping an eye on it. Thank you.
Gabe, does that conclude your presentation on those 2 months financials?
yes, I have just a few other updates for the board on finances,
Okay.
but yeah, that concludes the financial report itself.
Okay, then we need a motion to approve December 2018's financial report and January 2019 financial report.
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Show the financial reports for December 2018 and January 2019 approved. And continue on.
Yep. So, Mr. Chair, the only thing I want to add to the financial report, not necessarily the substance of the report, that's why it was okay for you to approve it, is, as you notice, we are in QuickBooks now. And so those reports look a little different. I sent out reports to staff on Monday on the new format and everything, and obviously there's a lot of questions, and so I'll be working with program managers and the chiefs on kind of getting things clarified, tuning anything to make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs on the reports. And so I just wanted to let the board, make the board aware of that transition has been completed. In fact, the checks or the warrants that some of the board members signed today were actually generated out of QuickBooks now. So the last piece we're hanging on to in Tyler for is the payroll piece until we get the telestaff up and running, and then we'll make the transition on payroll.
Okay, great.
And then the only other thing we're doing on finance is we are going to apply for the annual deflator for DHS on our ambulance billing rate. So if you remember a few years ago, and I know we've got some new board members here, our ambulance charges, our ambulance rates are rate regulated by the state. And so they essentially set our ambulance billing rate. And we can request a higher rate or a lower rate. And a couple of years ago, we requested what's called a general rate increase, where we submit a lot of financial documents, a lot of disclosures, projections to show them why we need more money to cover our operating costs for the ambulance operation itself. This year, last year we applied for the annual deflator, which is actually an automatic rate increase that you can get simply by sending a letter saying, I would like a rate increase. I would like the annual deflator rate increase. And it's based upon a few consumer price indexes, and DHS sets that number. Some years, and sometimes during the recession, that number was a negative. So obviously we didn't apply for it then. But last year, I believe it was 2.2%, and this year it's 1.35. So we'll be sending that letter off to DHS for that annual deflator on our ambulance billing rates.
What's the turnaround time when you send that off?
I usually get it within 30 days.
Okay.
And then we'll update all our rates within our ambulance billing system and with access, and then we'll be billing at that rate that's 1.3% higher. So,
Okay, great. Thank you.
thank you.
With that said, the next item on the agenda is the discussion, possible action, moving district credit cards to the National Bank of Arizona's Fire District Program.
All right, so Mr. Chair, I'm happy that Walker Armstrong found no issues within our credit cards. And the reason for that, they didn't find any issues, is because both Pam and now our office spent an exorbitant amount of time involved in credit card reconciliation. We have two different banks that we have credit cards through, and there's a few issues in my opinion from a finance standpoint. One, we have a large number of generic cards out there. So it'll be like an admin card or a wildland card. And we still want to have cards like that available, because there's individuals that may need to take a credit card to go make a purchase, but not somebody we want to have an issued credit card to. And then also the fact that we're just dealing with two different banks on our credit cards makes reconciling a bit of a difficulty, because the credit card receipt only gives you the last four numbers. And right now, everybody just turns those receipts into finance. Nobody's responsible really for their own credit card reconciliation, which also comes from makes an issue from a compliance standpoint when receipts aren't turned in or the expense isn't documented or coded properly. So National Bank of Arizona, I actually came out with an amazing program that's with Arizona Fire Districts. So kind of some nice things about it is it's a purchasing card. So it works similar to a credit card, other than you have more control over how and where the card can be used. So you can set limits and restrictions on a card that it could only be used for fuel, or it could only be used at service stations for fuel, oil, and related expenses. It allows personal branding, which we don't have an issue too much at Sedona, but some districts we get I grabbed the wrong card because my personal card and the district card look alike. Well, we could actually put the Sedona Fire logo on this card to help reduce that mistake. And probably one of the most, actually the two biggest things that I like about it is currently we don't have any rebate or points program or cashback program with our cards. This one does come with a minimum 1% back, of which 90% goes to the district and 10% goes to actually the AFTA organization. And then based on volume, a higher percentage of that rebate percentage grows. So I liked that. And then the last piece I liked was it actually comes with a mobile app as well as an online portal for expense tracking. So at the point of sale, the cardholder can take a picture of their receipt from their phone on the app, code it appropriately, and then at the end of each billing cycle, submit their monthly credit card report for approval, and then it'll store everything in a nice, organized manner.
Sounds like a training session is coming, how to use the national.
Yes,
Credit
which
card.
which National Bank will provide.
That was my next question.
Yes.
Can I ask about, so are the credit limits gonna stay the same? Or can we have increased credit limits to be able to, work with this 1% cash back so we can get more?
Yeah, so right, and that's one of the things that we that they kind of push as an incentive on that rebate is use that card for more than you've normally used the credit card for. And so yes, we will work on making sure we have a healthy credit limit. And because it's a purchasing card, typically there's the limits aren't as low as they are on credit cards because you are required to pay the balance off every month, similar to like an American Express card, although American Express just isn't widely used where in rural America. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't look at that option. So yes, that there will be more threshold and purchasability with that.
So is that almost kind of like a new source of revenue?
It could be, yeah, or it will be, yes, yes. I mean, assuming the board authorizes this.
And
What
how-
type
how-
of funds are we talking about?
I'm sorry?
About, what does that 1% represent in a normal year?
I would say we probably average $20,000 a month on our credit cards. So on our regular expenses, so you take that's $240,000 a year, 1%. I mean $2,400. But
That's good.
Better than nothing?
right, which currently we're getting 0. So
How did AFTA manage to get a share of this?
Nice.
it's AFTA. No. National Bank actually, AFTA is the one who approached National Bank of Arizona about it, and saying, we really need something that works more like a purchasing card, and not a credit card, and so and has these features that fire districts need. The other one thing I didn't mention, it also has a fleet component of it as well, so it could actually require, like our fuel card requires, people to enter shop number and various things like that when they use the fuel card. We could actually set that up on this and potentially just use this for everything. But I'm not proposing that right now. So.
Okay.
But really, the biggest thing on this and the biggest reason why we think this is a good move is the expense tracking piece of it, the software to do that. So.
Gotcha. Chief, anything to add to that?
Yeah, when I saw this, and I think Gabe was already working on it, but I got the information and I gave it to him after we went down. Actually, Joy and I read our mandatory training, and I was really glad to see it because in the federal government, every wildland firefighter has a travel card, and at the end of the month, if they don't reconcile their bill properly, the consequence is it comes out of your paycheck, and it works really well because it keeps everybody's stuff. It's just easier to track when you have cards that don't have people's names on it. Like Gabe said, you don't know who didn't turn in the receipt, or there's a little bit of pointing fingers, and this holds that individual accountable for it, and it makes it a lot easier to track the expenses and to know who made the purchases, and with the way that it's reported with those, take pictures of that and immediately reconcile it against whatever is the appropriate account for the expense. I think it makes good sense.
Super, thank you. Any further discussion or questions of Gabe or the chief? No? Okay, I'll need a motion for the approval of the this changeover.
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
if I may ask the motion, authorize the chief to sign any documents with National Bank
As the
as
primary
part of the
signer?
motion. Yeah.
Okay.
to execute any documents with National Bank.
Okay, so,
I
The-
amend the motion to allow the chief to sign all the documents.
okay, so the motion's been made to switch over to the National Bank of Arizona purchase and to include the chief's signature as primary. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, show the motion passed. Thank you. Okay, next up on our agenda is the chief's staff report.
Sorry.
Hi, good afternoon. So I tried something a little different here to kind of make my process flow. So I welcome any comments that any of you have on how effective this is with that. So, one of the things that I'm gonna have to break it. On a side note, I now have to wear glasses, and that just happened. So I'm gonna stand up here where I can read this because I'm still not used to them yet. Yeah, everybody get a good laugh. All right, so looking through the chief's report, there's a few things that I wanted to highlight regarding the significant events for the last, technically it's about the last month and a half since we had that early board meeting in January. It's been busy. It's been busy with weather-related events. It's been busy with fire-related events, and some of the larger ones were on the 16th of January. There's a rescue that occurred on Oak Creek Cliffs. A resident had driven across the water at a level that he had driven across, at least in his own approximation, many times before. And it was just a little bit higher. He ended up getting swept off the roadway. Fortunately, he stayed in his vehicle, and the crews were able to rescue him. And other than being cold, he ended up being okay. So that was a win there. There's also the next significant event was a structure fire that occurred on the 26th of January in a mobile home immediately adjacent to other mobile homes in the trout farm trailer. So during that incident, one of the firefighters, one of the company officers that was responding, was moving in between the two vehicles to protect it, or between the fire structure and a structure immediately adjacent to it to protect that adjacent structure. And his concern was he could see something in the middle of an area where there's a lot of flames, and he thought it was some of the small 5-pounder propane tanks. So he's going there to cool them off so that didn't vent on its own. And through the process of moving in there, something grabbed the side of his hood, pulled his hood away from the side of his face, and he got a small burn on his cheek. He's doing better right now. His engineer told him that it looks like a Star Trek sign, that maybe it's a sign that he's going to be a Trekkie. But fortunately, other than that small wound, nothing else. His PPE did perform as expected. It's just a matter of something getting a hold of it and pulling his hood away and exposing some of his skin right there. But he's doing well. And they protected the exposures. And I think in the information that I'd sent the board before and that we put on Facebook as well, there's pictures of what the fire looked like before they arrived. And so, given that and just being a 2-person engine to arrive first on scene, I think they did an exceptional job preventing damage to any other structures. So, the other event that I thought was worth highlighting because it required us to augment our response was the Sedona Marathon. And Division Chief Mazulis staffed the aid tent. Chief Lukowski was the one that was running operations in the field, and then I got to sit inside the little command vehicle with the police chief and try not to eat donuts all day while we coordinated their responses. But everything went really well. It was good weather. It was really cool. So we had a minimal number of calls, and I don't believe we actually even transported one patient off of the race course this time, which is a win. So we got the road open quick. Well, we didn't get the road open. The police got the road open quicker than they anticipated. The next event was another structure fire. Am I doing something wrong? Just the way it goes? Okay. That happened on, at 30, and at that particular fire, by the time the crews got there, the fire was up in the attic, which is a bad place when it's already venting out of the opposite side. So fire pretty much ran the course of the attic, and no, I don't know, John, can you help me out with what percentage of that structure was a loss? It was high, I'm sure, with that.
Yeah, the entire attic area was pretty heavily damaged. The bones of the structure itself are going to be fine, but it's essentially they're going to have to go through and remodel the entire interior and put a new roof on it.
So a lot of water damage too, I assume.
Well, yeah, and it was during the snow and rainstorm, so, and with the roof off of the structure, what didn't get wet due to a hose stream was soaked the next morning because of the rain.
Yeah, it was
Did you say
unfortunate.
30 Beaver Creek, is that in VOC?
It is.
I think
Yep.
I sold that house.
Was it determined what caused that fire?
Well, just to back up, the trailer fire out at the Trout Creek was undetermined. We were not able to figure out what caused that. The structure fire at 30 Beaver Street was improper electrical wiring, and I'll fill you in on the other.
Yeah,
one.
I'll tag you on the next one too.
Yeah.
So, the next thing that occurred was on Valentine's Day. We actually ended up augmenting our staffing with 2 additional technical rescue technicians from 7:30 at night until 7:30 in the morning during when that peak flood was going to be, and it's about 8:30 watching the gauges, and we came up pretty quick to already to 10 feet. So I chose to come down here, tied in with the battalion chief, and shortly thereafter they got called to they got a request to assist with rescues in Rimrock. And so those 3 personnel went over there. I took over the duty for them. They ended up rescuing 8 people with their efforts, 14 people total that were rescued. And then they moved to Verde Santa Fe, and I thought they were going to have to do rescues there, but as it turned out, there wasn't a need. So about 4 o'clock in the morning, they came back into the district, and so it was good that we had that staffing up for anything that happened here, because we were also able to maintain the technicians that we had in all the other areas and assist through a mutual aid response, having them close enough to be able to pull them back if we needed to. But at that time, I think it was 12.5 was about what the creek made it to. So highest level since 2004. The highest level since the new bridge has been put in across on 179 there. So it was good to see that all that performed as designed. Because you could feel the boulders bumping into the side of it when you're standing there at night. Yes, sir.
A question with regard to monitors. Are they monitored remotely?
Yes, there are. Yep, and there's multiple stream gauges, and so, but especially the Swiftwater technicians, and then myself and all the other chief officers, and we'll sit there and monitor those and look for the levels on the different transponders, and you kind of see what's flowing. And what my role that night, and when I came down there before VC Baker had to leave, was he was going to take care of all the operational stuff, and I was just going to coordinate the intelligence and try to get the information out to the community. So Lars Romig did a great job providing some of those posts with the levels and what the different levels meant as far as consequence goes. Those were really well received by the public. And then I was talking to the National Weather Service, and they were in contact with the Colorado River Basin hydrologists, and were providing us with some really good intel about, like when they thought it was going to dip, then they saw that there's more stuff coming into Munns Canyon from up on top by Munns Park. So they warned us about that they probably weren't going to see the dip that we saw, and it was right. We actually saw a little bump after that. So there's a lot of data to coordinate on a call like that with all the confluences coming together, and so it was I think it was good to have a couple of people there doing it. Chief Mazulis, you have something?
Mr. McCarthy, USGS Flowchart is an app that you can download, and you can pick which rivers you want to watch all over the state. So it's kind of a neat tool to help. It's U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS Flowchart.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for all those postings, because what I do is I put that on my Sedona Fire District board member site. So, because people are always asking me, so I just refer them to that. So every time you post, I post, and people really appreciate it. So thanks for all of that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
thank you,
did
Joe.
Al.
I've been posting on my Facebook, and I have a pretty large group, and I've been hearing people, they're noticing that.
Yeah.
Because it's so scientific and it's so analytical, dealing with water levels and everything that,
Are they looking at you a little bit differently now?
well, they said, Perhaps.
Al's in with the cool group now.
So, I guess the chief reports, so I could talk about things in whatever order I want, but that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, though, is that, we're really trying to push that outreach and in whatever way makes sense for the consumer of the information. And right now, it seems like that one of the ways that really makes sense is those Facebook posts. The one that Lars Romig, he also drafted the one about the winter storm, the initial one, and it was shared over 500 times by this morning when I updated it with the most recent information on this next storm. And our reach, they call it, so that the number of people that have been contacted through either a share or something has been over 200,000 since we in the last 28 days. So almost 250,000 people that, some of them, somebody may look at the same post or at two different posts, so they would be, each count as a reach on each one. But suffice it to say, that's up over 800% over what it was the 28 days prior. And so people are consuming that information, and so we're trying to find ways to make it bite-sized and the way they want it, because if we can keep the emergency from happening, that's better than us having to go out in the water, or in the snow.
Just additional.
Yes, sir.
This morning, there was a traffic accident at Back and Beyond, and it closed 179 down for a brief period of time. And so I went on to this city website.
Yes, sir.
I didn't see anything with regard to that. I don't know how long it was down. It was down long enough for someone to cancel an appointment with me. So that kind of information, although it may not come from the fire district, it's certainly, if we're aware of it, to share it with the city so that the city can put it out, so that we can avoid certain roads and so on.
Yes, and their Nixle, their Nixle app is a good tool, and it has Nixel, I think, or LE.
LE, I believe.
Is it? So
It's really good.
it is, and I think there's, we still we need to fine tune this, and Heidi and I have been doing some work with some other people that are much better at it than I am, but it's finding out like what our role is. Are we more the advanced warning people, and that's more the near real time stuff, or how does that work so we get a good message out? But I agree with you. It's definitely valuable, and people have come to appreciate it, and I think it's helped it when we're carrying other messages, whether it's a fire safety message or hey, there's a campfire burn, as we build our base, so when it comes time to put those messages out too, we're already have established a reputation and have rapport with those people.
Chief,
So
just so you know, I was in my office and heard on the radio when they closed the road down, so I put a little blurb on our Facebook page just saying the road was down, and then a couple hours later when it opened up, I just deleted that message off the top of the page there. So
I think it
Thanks,
behooves
John.
us, if we're going to pass the information along, as once we find out that the road we find it's open, we'll share it again. So for those of us that are doing that.
yeah, that's a tough part about it when, especially with the BCs are doing it, because next thing you know, they get busy when they start something, and so I'm going to continue to try to augment that, especially over this next weekend, is help them with that stuff, because they can start it and then leave people kind of hanging, which isn't the right way to do it either. But they get busy with emergencies too. So
this heavy snow that's expected, Flagstaff is gonna get a lot. Do you expect that to affect spring flooding?
it certainly could. Yeah. So I don't know if this is the right way to say it or not, but I would just say it loads the gun, because once we get that snowpack up high like that, then all we need is that warm storm. If the snowpack's not present, then that warm storm won't really have as much consequence. But if there's 3 feet of snow in every place above 6,800 feet, like there may well be by the time the storm's over, then it would just take one warm storm of a couple inches to enough to melt that snow, and we could have 98 level floods, 94 level floods. What it was 93. 20 feet.
Verde Valley flooding.
Yeah. So, last one, I do want to talk about this because the crews made a great stop on this last one as well. It was the structure fire at 245 Morningside Drive, and it was confined to the bedroom. And there's two things there. One, the crews did a good job. The other thing is that the bedroom door was shut, right, John? And that kept it to the room of origin. And John could talk about the cause.
Actually, that was on Sanborn. There was a structure fire Saturday and another one on Sunday. And the
Oh,
one on
man.
Sunday was
blew it.
Morningside. The one on Saturday was Sanborn Drive. And yes, the back bedroom, for whatever reason, when they left, they had closed the door inside the house. Neighbors saw smoke coming out of the ventilation unit on top of the roof, called us. Our guys walked in the house, said just a real light haze of smoke, walked right to the back bedroom where the fire was, opened the door, and were able to put it out. We tell people to keep their doors closed. And actually, this was going to be my safety message. This was the picture-perfect example of the difference. A little bit of smoke damage outside of the room. Inside the room was gutted, but really, really good stop. The one on Morningside Drive, that was actually due to an improper wood stove placement. So there was two of them.
Thanks. So yeah, for Sedona,
Busy.
4 structure fires
Yeah.
in one reporting period is pretty significant. This other section about challenges and resolutions, I just kind of wanted to use this opportunity to kind of keep the board up to speed on some of the different things we're looking at as kind of an eyes forward approach. No action, but just some stuff to make you aware of. So we're continuing to work with one of our challenges that we're faced with is that data integration from multiple sources, and I hope if not next month, but the month after, to have some different ideas on ways that we can improve that to you. But we are in the process of gathering information right now. That hasn't been resolved yet, but there's a lot of things that I think have real potential to help us with that analysis part of our decision-making process. The other thing I want to share with you, the weather impacts. So, this next storm is going to be significant. The models haven't changed very much, except by increasing the amount of snow over the last 6 or 7 days. So all the runs from the far out ones that normally are pretty inaccurate to the closer in ones. And so one of the things that has occurred is based on that. I made the risk informed decision to close the administrative offices on Thursday. So I waited until 1500 when we got the last report from the National Weather Service, and they have conference calls for emergency response personnel. And at that time, they said that from 05 in the morning till 1100 that they were going to get up to 5 inches of snow in Sedona, and then up to 15 inches by the end of the storm the next morning. That's just, it didn't make any sense to put anybody on the road in there, or to create that enticement where we're open and so somebody else is going to come to us to do business when we're telling everybody to stay off the road. So, hopefully other people will follow our cue and we'll stay off the roads 24 hours, and then we'll be past it. These are rare events in Sedona, and it seemed like the best way to minimize potential consequence for
Do you know if the school district is calling a snow day?
I have not heard that yet. Do you know that, Chief Mazulis?
Per Facebook, most of the school districts in town or in the region have published some scenario-based stuff for parents. As first choice is everything's normal, second choice we're going to have a delay, and third choice we're going to cancel. But none of them have committed to cancellations yet.
They're waiting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody believes me.
Yeah, right. It's an outlier for Sedona storms, that's for sure. The last part was the communication to the public, and we already touched on that. I want to let you all know that we are looking at better ways to be able to reach out to the public and get the information out there and provide it to them in a way that they want to consume it, instead of just, I think it's funny because I have my own plan on how things are supposed to go, and so I do it that way. But if that's not the way that they want it, then I better change my plan. So we're trying to adapt to that as we move forward, and Heidi's keeping us honest in that respect.
Can I ask just a quick question? So in regards to preparedness, do you think that we would be the entity to put that information out, how to be prepared for situations, even though it's only a day?
You know, we've shared some of it about when the creeks come up and things like that. And there's some other graphics that I got from ADOT about, you know, stay back from the plows and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, the message I just try to tell people, and I think we have a responsibility in sharing that, is that you're best to avoid, unless it's essential travel, don't do it on Thursday. You know, get ready ahead of time and enjoy the fact that it's going to be really pretty on, you know, Friday afternoon or Saturday. Gene?
Up here, once in a while, we'll see one of those electric signs in the middle of the road saying there's blockage or there's an accident ahead or whatever. It starts at 17.
Yes, sir.
And then, of course, the highway belongs to the state.
That's correct.
And then, we've got 2 counties with 2 separate areas of responsibility when it comes to snow, for example. It would seem to me logical to place those units ahead of time. We can't do it, but we can ask Yavapai County to do it and Coconino County to do it, and the state perhaps anticipating closures of highways.
Yes, yeah, we can, and I can tell you, like, if it's anything like the flood was, it was, I was in contact with both the emergency managers all night, and, you know, actually there's a couple vehicles that were parked at West Fork, so called the sheriff to let him know that they were down there, and the Aaron Dick, who's in charge of the search and rescue, came down and went and ran plates on, found out there were people that were actually in those residents nearby there, so there wasn't anybody in the creek, but, you know, I will, we'll be having more conversations with him. We'll make sure that we communicate that to him, that it's important to get that information out early. I noticed it was already on the variable message boards up in Flagstaff, warning about the winter storm, winter weather watch, severe dry, or, you know, dangerous conditions, things like that. So, but I will follow up, make sure we get that information out.
Thank you, Chief.
You
You know,
betcha.
Chief, just to follow up on Gene's comment, right at the bottom of the hill in the center divider, they've already placed a
saw-
electronic sign.
I saw
So
it.
I think the counties
Nice.
are preparing for that very thing.
Yeah, this is, I mean, if it pans out, it's a pretty rare event, so, for us. It's supposed to be negative 20 at my house tomorrow morning, so, yeah. Good times, good times. So I did want to kind of hit on some of the training highlights, things that have gone on in the last period as well. You know, the ESO adoption, there's a lot of things that I've learned from this. Some of the things I think I'd already learned in class, but I'd forgotten. And one of them is that if you make that day that you launch a product as like, if you kind of frame it so that's completion, that it doesn't create the right mindset. So, you know, once we launched ESO, maybe we're 50% of the way done, but there's that transfer of training that has to take place. And that's one of the things that Chief Mazulis has been working diligently on, is making sure that the people that, as we identify errors, I think I give the credit to him and Brian Espial, frankly, because once errors are identified, then they're getting that piece of training out to correct those errors, and just knowing that that's going to happen, and taking it as a part of a matter of course. But I think it's important as we look at adopting, especially new things like that are so sweeping, that take care of all of our records management systems, our emergency patient care reporting, that touch all these different parts, that we make sure that we set the right expectation, and that is that once we go live, there's still a lot of work to go on the other end of it. So, engine company inspections. I was going to talk briefly about the GIS part of this after you know this slide, because it was something that's come up a couple of times as far as training, and there's some pieces of that training and pieces of work that's been done that tie directly to the engine company inspections. So if it's all right with the board, I'll bring that up. I have some other slides about the GIS stuff here next. The Wellness and Mental Health Summit, so that's another piece of training that we attended, that members of the Sedona Fire District attended, and also that our own John Scaife presented at, which was pretty cool, down in Phoenix. The Active Shooter Hostile Event Response Training, ASHER they call it, that also occurred in the last day. And you know, unfortunately, both those two types of training came together in an event that occurred at the Cottonwood Public Safety Building, where a gentleman chose to take his own life in proximity to our personnel. And so we have continued to reach out. As again, Chief Mazulis has been taking the lead on that, making sure that our people are well cared for. As unfortunately, we couldn't do anything for the person, but we want to make sure our people are well cared for, and it just kind of reinforced the whole station security and everything that we need to make sure takes place here. Yes, sir.
The fire district recently acquired is it vest?
Ballistic protection, yep, that's correct.
I heard somebody that this town respects mock the fire district yesterday for having bought these. I didn't say anything because I really didn't know what to say other than, you know, to him, the idea that the firemen need to be protected from bullets was silly. How would one have responded to that?
So one of the reasons that we chose to purchase ballistic protection and that we've chose to have our personnel engage in commit training time and commit training dollars to this Asher is because while those events are extremely rare, the consequence of those events, especially in a school, can be catastrophic. And you know, if you think of the loss of life that has been that has taken place in other events like that, our ability to be properly protected allows us to, we're never going to be tip of the spear, that's not our job, but allows us to go in immediately behind the first sweep where there still is some danger, a danger that we've mitigated to a level that we feel comfortable with, and provide aid. And you know, the whole Stop the Bleed campaign and everything associated with that is because if you're going to save someone's life in an event like that, and if they aren't dead immediately after being shot, you're going to control the bleeding and you're going to quickly get them out to a trauma center. And so this allows us to do that. So, you know, there's a lot of things we spend money on, and certainly this is something that we were very deliberate about, and we looked at different models. And honestly, some of the initial ways of responding to those incidents that was presented to us as a way for us to go, it was too aggressive. And I feel like having our people have the proper protection, going immediately after the first sweep of law enforcement with a law enforcement escort, being trained to be able to work with them to do that in a coordinated manner and have the appropriate protection that we can mitigate that risk to an acceptable level is the right middle ground. And you know, I hope we never have to use it. I hope that that ballistic gear, you know, never takes a bullet.
Is this a new approach for fire districts and departments to acquire this equipment, or is this?
Well, this will be the third time we've done similar things in the past, and we've committed to varying degrees to do this. You know, I myself have attained. I worked with DPS as a medic, as a SWAT medic, and I went to CONTOMS is the name of the training. It's put on by the Park Police, and it's a very more aggressive, where you're going in there with the cops. You know, that's not what this is. So there is an NFPA standard for this, and we are aligning our actions with that NFPA standard. So yeah, I think we're in a good spot as far as that right risk profile.
Thank you.
Is there a plan for a biannual exercise? You've had an exercise, but a couple of years from now, people tend to forget things and so on.
Yep. Yeah, we actually have a couple different exercises slated. Unfortunately, two of them the trainings we had to cancel because they were Thursday and Friday. So we will reschedule those though.
Chief, if I can make a comment on Al's point, how fortunate we are to live in a community where we can see protective body armor like this as, do we really need that? Coming
Yeah.
from a large metropolitan district, we utilized it. Everyone had a vest, and we're talking, 15 to 2,000 of these every day was on all the rigs. And we went to calls that included assault with deadly weapons, shootings, stabbings, domestic disputes, all of which required us to put on our vests. Now, we don't use them just for shooting. We use them for a multitude of things, or any other incident that the company commander would feel it necessary. So that's how I would respond to that particular individual that may have mocked the purchase. But I think it's just a public education, and then allowing them to see that these are more than just for shootings.
That's
So
a good point.
It's something that it becomes like a second skin on you once you become used to and knowing that they're here. So, but again, how lucky we are that type of call load is so low in our community.
You're absolutely right. Last thing, so we had a couple of new firefighters, Firefighter King and Firefighter Tarver. They just finished their 6-month testing. So they're halfway through their probationary period, and they're both doing well. I'm going to just quickly if it pleases the board, go over some of the different GIS stuff, because there's some interest in this, and I felt like as a part of, you know, that what's going on with the engine company inspections, it's good to see how it kind of incorporates. So a lot of different products are produced by our GRS. Some of them are to inform our decisions when it comes to analysis, and other ones are for routing. You know, the basic of those is the wall map. We also have map books, and it's, you know, it's amazing how much work goes into a map book and how important it is to get it right. I remember the first ones we had, they thought it would be a good idea to make the hydrants red. So when you turn on the red light in the engine to keep your night vision, you lose everything that's red. So you lose all the, so yeah, those are difficult mistakes to come back from when you have a bunch of map books already printed up. So that was years and years ago. They also work with the different agencies to make sure that our map books all look the same. So Tammy helps them, and that way when we go to a different agency, we're not trying to figure out their new map book schema. They all align. And when they come to us to assist us, they all align. So there's also the GIS that's central to the analysis maps, which, you know, there's different ways to communicate information, but I think one of the things that I've noticed, at least in my world, is that almost every one of the critical decisions that's made on a large fire or a large event, whether it's a flooding or anything else, is made on a hood of a truck over a map. And so having those maps for analysis, we're going to show some analysis that's more of the, you know, the slower analysis, the behind the scenes analysis, but that analysis takes place even in near real time on an incident. So this was a heat map, so it tells you where the high number of responses are in 2018 relative to the district. This is just zoomed in, so it's just one big heat map. But if you can imagine, you could take that and create different criteria, and depending on the scale, and you find out where those clusters are, and you'll see that a little bit in this next one, which is a different way to portray the information, where the diameter of the circle represents the number of calls within a certain area. So if you were to line those circles up, you know, the one that's out there in the village of Oak Creek will probably line up with the assisted living facilities, the larger circles. And then there may be intuitive judgments that you have about where calls occur that as soon as you see it portrayed in spatially like this, that you find out are wrong. And so then it can better inform your decisions going forward. The other one is call analysis shown within the 3 facilities, you know, kind of drilling down even further, big heat map to dots to now, this is what's inside those dots, is you can break it down by what type of calls occur at each one of the facilities and kind of see how that represents. And there's an opportunity there, hey, maybe there's a piece there we can train on. You know, I know the Chief Mazulis has done some of them, coordinate with them on their response on how we treat different issues to avoid that. And until you start seeing it in front of you, it's kind of hard to figure out what that might be. You know, the other response time maps is you see the response time analysis. So if you start to see where things are longer, and that can help inform decisions about station locations, maybe where there's areas where changes in road conditions have impacted our response times that certainly occurred during the reconstruction of Highway 179. You know, Survey 123, that's one of the devices that they're using out there to do the data collection in the field. If you can imagine just a regular multiple choice test, if you will, or drop down, but it's all done electronically. And so once they fill it out and submit it with some of the information that has to do with the engine company inspections or anything else, we use them in wildfires for recording damage to property, all sorts of different forms. Then it's uploaded. It's geo-referenced, so it knows exactly where that information was taken. You can attach a picture to it. So then everybody has that information. And the good thing about it is that it's retrievable, so it's queryable. So if you turn in a bunch of the Biscuit Fire is what it's called, 500,000 acres in California, in Oregon, one actually burned in California too, but largest fire. And when I moved there, or when I went there to take over structure protection, they literally gave me 2 or 3 reams of single paper reports that were done by a bunch of engines, because after they burned Tillamook, I hope I get all this right, because John will correct me if I don't, but the Oregon Conflagration Act was created. They had the fire marshals in charge of Oregon's in charge of stuff, so they were in charge of doing this, and they had their 3-part paper form. Well, everybody had to write the GPS coordinates. You should have seen once we paid someone to do data entry to get all those entered. Not only was there a big delay in getting the right information to us,
Doing those reports.
but there are dots everywhere, because you drop, you mess up one digit on that Latin long, and next thing you know, it's all over the place. So with Survey 123, you get better quality data, get it more quickly, and I think at less of a cost in time. So you see, I can't see that, but there's different fields. They all have drop down. fully editable. We can make it whatever we want. You can populate certain information already that exists. So if we tie it all to like a parcel number, where they only have to check it and update it, so they don't have to punch it all in by hand. And so it really allows us to make it quite a bit easier. And again, like I said, it's geo-referenced. Collector app, kind of the same thing, but just where we put map features on there. So we use this a lot in wildland fires, and you can just add data points to the maps. So whether it's where you're putting line in, where you're going to put a proposed dozer line in. And so Tammy, because she has all those layers, and we did it on the slide fire, she has everything in the same format that the people that come in on those large incident management teams use it, and she's good at interfacing with them. So she provides them with all that information. Then when people like me, like the ops chief, goes out to the field or flies in a helicopter and has a map, you have the same stuff. So what we do is we make sure that it's the same stuff on the paper map is what's in the computer map. So if there's a hot shot on the ground, with his crew, and he has a big rolled up paper map, and I tell him, hey, where it says Oak Creek in section 17 by the K and Oak is where that fire spotted over. And even though I'm looking at a computer map, he's looking at a paper map, we're able to be able to kind of orient to one another that way. And that's possible because Tammy has all that data and has the ability to share it back and forth.
Will those show historical path as well?
Sure. Yep. And matter of fact, we will. There's different ways to do it, but like we'll use the decommissioned forest maps that have the old roads that aren't being used anymore. Sometimes that information comes in on LiDAR. Sometimes you'll see, because it's so accurate for it's a terrain relief, you can see where an old road bed is, where there might be an opportunity to take advantage of stuff. And there's actually some products now that they're doing where it combines a bunch of different spatial information to say, hey, this is a place where you might have a high probability of success on catching that fire, the vegetation type, everything. So it more quickly informs your decision making, so it gives you more decision space to execute versus spending all that time trying to figure out where it might be.
So historical burns when have.
Oh yeah, burn scars too. Yes, sir.
Exactly. So
Yep.
if you get a historical information when have you, the pathway of that fire based on fuel stick and moisture and humidity and so on.
That's correct, and those can inform the decision two ways. If it's a recent enough burn, could slow the fire down. If it's a recent but not, say it's a 5 or 6 year, it might just have grass in it that will move faster. So you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of information there to be derived. So that's just an example of some of the collector apps that we use, the way we use it here, to gather the information relative to different features that are essential for our structural firefighting as well. You get to choose the symbols that'll point to the map of the information. And then when it's done, you can see this. This is the high school, and you see all the different common fire department symbology on it. So, and everybody gets that. And then, so this now, Tammy can update it to the active 911 application. It's an application that we all have on our phones. And you'll see little blue house icons on there. Click on that, and anytime to pull up the quick look map area or the pre-plan. And then when you pull that up, and then you see things like this. So you see exactly where all the street names are, what the structures are called, if you're in like a large area that has all the, how cool is that, right? To be able to get it right there, instead of like flipping to the right map page and then can't remember, do we put our quick looks on the same place as the map page or in the back by alphabetical name? Yeah, they're all right there. Pull up, see where the hydrants
The
are.
members are actually in real time as they're responding, going through their cell phone or their tablet and pulling up all this information.
That's correct. Yeah, the company officer is able to do this en route, or whoever's riding right seat in the ambulance, and so it's better than just. I mean, it's more than just cute maps. It is getting us to the emergency faster and in the right place, and so yeah, it's got a lot of utility. And then
So the 800, 1200s and the Thomas guides are no longer.
yeah, exactly.
We're opening up the fold-up map.
Yeah, on the truck and have a blowout. Exactly. I think it's funny though, those wall maps still for that first out the door to make sure you're the left or right turn. You still start there, and it's pretty important. And then there's other things like these interface maps. So one of the neat things, we were at the slide fire and all the crews that came in at night, and the same thing actually on the Brins fire. We had printed out a bunch of the same maps that the volunteers had done to show hose length, distance, everything back in there, but they had the names, and maybe the names of the structures weren't right, but they had each one of the little communities blown up, and I was just tearing off pages, crews that were going in there to work in certain areas, and so they had those maps, and now we have a way to provide those, and we just airdrop them to everybody's tablet. But it's
Chief, do we have the ability for those incoming resources from outside our community can tie into this 911 app and get the same material?
You know, I'm not sure if they can tie into the active 911. Buzz, I don't know how many licenses we have, because there is a certain number of licenses, and Buzz is one of the people that manages the users. Do you know, Ed, how many we have?
You have to have a agency access. We do have a box in each bay that has the old style map book in it, and but as far as active 911 goes, they have to have our agency ID.
And
We
we-
used
and
to
we-
have someone that, we called them bird dogs. And
Yeah.
they were assigned to
Yep.
the engine truck or whatever was responding, and they were familiar with the area to guide in.
That's
the,
correct.
Unfamiliar crews.
Yep. And we do have a PDF of all of our paper maps, so we can get them to the crews that way. They're just not in the active 911. But those,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I'd have to verify, but if I'm not mistaken, if units up here responding, then they'd get hit on their active 911, and whether by populating our address, it populates all the information that.
Yeah, if they're for structure units, yeah. So it all
Yeah.
depends on what type of event it is, but I believe you're right, Ed. And so the PDF maps are all geo-referenced to, and there's a program we use called Avenza that, so it will show you where you're at, even though it's just a regular PDF. It's got the spatial data embedded in it. So you don't need any fancy program. You just open up the Avenza, and then it will just show you a little dot where you are on that map.
So there isn't like a GPS turn-to-turn voice in given that you're actually reading the electronic data to get to the location that you're going to, right?
For the most part, yeah. There is turn by turn if it's a point location, but oftentimes if it's an emergency incident, we're pulling a bunch of people in, from other agencies, whether it's a flood or a fire. We may not know exactly where we want them to go, but we want to be able to have them orient themselves, spatially, and so that dot will help them know where they're at on the map. But it does not give them turn-to-turn directions on
No
Avenza.
British voice that directs you.
Yeah, it makes you feel like more confident in those directions. And then interface maps, and that's one of the things that we use when we initially did the interface, the wildland urban interface code, to determine what areas would be impacted by that code, buffered off of certain edges of the community, things like that. So the wildland mapping, I talked about it before about how we have get the maps at the very beginning, have all the right data so we can quickly get it in there and get it incorporated. And the other part of it is the information that we use afterwards. After the slide fire, when they're talking about the flooding potential and the debris flow potential, went around and did these different, basically survey 1, 2, 3, where you went through and did surveys of the different properties, so you knew where people would be, what vehicles would still be there if a debris flow came over that home. So what they're leaving, because it won't look the same when you come back. And there may be a vehicle that vehicle's abandoned. So it's another one of those risk things to help better inform our decisions, is that if you know that the Volkswagen bus that's there doesn't run and is going to be there even when everybody's out, but the car that's normally in the driveway is, if that car's gone, then they're gone. And if you know that the bedroom was at the far right corner of the home, and so if the debris flow comes through at 2 o'clock in the morning and that car happens to be there, you'll know where to look. You increase the likelihood that you'll be able to save those people, and you reduce the exposure to the rescuers by having them not work something that is unnecessary, especially in an environment like that where it's really dangerous. So that's some of the other ways that we're able to leverage the GIS data to better inform the decisions made in the field. Topo map, operations map, different purposes, so different schemas. And then the analysis map. This is actually the map that shows those colors where they said that the likelihood of the debris flow came from what they call a BEAR, a Burned Area Emergency Response Assessment. And so then we went through and prioritized where the highest risk of debris flows were first, and then went and did the communities there. So it also kind of informed the order in which we did the assessments. And then division also works with training to help new hires familiarize themselves with map book. There's a big part of it, I think this is the same, it's just in a different medium, where you have to sit there and ask somebody what street it is in their first due and make sure the new guys know where they're going and everything. So they just do it with some more fancy colors. Same approach though, same purpose. So that's some of the different ways that the GIS supports the Sedona Fire District and their mission. And the numbers, the monthly response numbers and the response times and stuff are in the board packet.
I thought it'd be worth commenting that they're quite good.
They are quite good.
Yes,
Oh.
for this month, our response time as well as the 90th percentile, but the response time being 6:07, very nice.
And truth be told, that could be because everybody went home after Christmas, and it was a little bit easier to get from point A to point B, or it could be for a lot of different reasons. I just want to throw that alibi in there in case next month
Sure.
we get busy and they're not. But that is, I know how important these metrics and being able to use them to inform decisions are to the board, and that is definitely a part of that analysis package I'm looking at, is being able to get you guys numbers consistent way going forward, and hopefully it will make Carrie's job a lot easier too, and everybody else that has to contribute to that data in the future. But with that, unless there's any questions, I will conclude my chief's report, my first chief's report.
You know, I'd like to make a few comments I've kind of reserved until you were finished, but.
Yes, sir.
First and foremost, getting back to the marathon, I'd also like to recognize two of our board members that also assisted in volunteering. Both Al and Jean were involved with parking at the marathon, and although I volunteered, also it would have constituted a quorum, and I didn't have time to put out the courtesy notification,
Yes, sir.
so I was spared working. So thank you.
Strong
guys.
work.
Thank you guys for contributing. Storm preparedness, it's been a marked improvement in the amount of notifications we're giving out, especially on social media. And I think it's being recognized by the community. And it's proof is in the pudding is the fact that the numbers are really, really way up. So, you know, building upon what we started out to do, we're really, really seeing some good results. So please keep that up.
Yes, sir.
You give a periodic news article in the Red Rock News, and I think it would be imperative or huge, however you want to describe it, that these sort of things get mentioned in there, so that when those who aren't into the social media but get their news from the newspaper can see the fact that, hey, if you go over here, you can see all these pretty graphs and all that stuff, and I think it'd be worth who of us to include that. We already mentioned about the vests. GIS. We looked at all these different maps, all the information that's being put out, all the upgrades, maintenance, program advancements, all these things. Normally you'd see a staff of half a dozen at least in any organization. We have one person doing this.
That's
if
correct.
I'm not mistaken.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? And I think Tammy does an outstanding job. I didn't realize until the number of maps that you showed right now. I had no idea that she did that much involvement and work with that to the benefit of all the members and the community. So please, relay to her our thanks for all
Yes,
the
sir,
hard
I will.
work. I think it'd be, we'd be remiss if we didn't. So thank you guys. And with that said, those were all my comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. With that said, next item on our agenda. Staff report is complete. Discussion possible action purchase order number 938 into the Inotex in the amount of $28,178.25 for structure firefighting personal protective equipment. Who was going to give us that?
That would be me.
Okay, you're up.
So, what you have in front of your board is a purchase order for our scheduled replacement of our structural PPE. Chief Cochran has developed a plan to get us up to meet, which I explained to you guys at the training session, but to get us up to where we have the appropriate amount of PPE within the timeline that it's defined by the NFPA standards for replacement. So this is part of that periodic purchase. One of the things that's interesting is that I think David did a really good job of negotiating a new price, because the vendor that we had before, after weeks of waiting for them to respond and saying, oh yeah, I'll get right back with you, said that, oh yeah, we can no longer carry the gear. So he had to go out and find somebody else that met the spec and do everything, and he did it in about 45 days, which I thought was pretty impressive. So that aligns. It is purchased through one of our, I can't remember which one it is, if it's the Galveston, but it's help me out here. What's that thing called?
Houston Galveston.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a best national price. It's a guaranteed best national price, like a GSA price.
Okay, so we have, this communication is for the purchase of these.
That's correct, and it is a budgeted item, and I think if,
And this is just for 15 sets, so that we're kind of easing into this from the looks of this, rather than buying an all-out, one-time purchase, so it kind of eases the budget a bit.
Yep, that's correct. And what Dave's done is that he's looked at the life cycle of those, where the priorities are for replacement, and then tried to smooth out those purchases over time. So then when we reach the end of it's time to replace the turnouts the next 10 years or whatever, then we're not having to replace them all at once. So it kind of just stays in perpetuity, or in a few sets every year, to get everybody up to speed and to stay that way without having those big spikes
Gotcha.
in the PPE budget.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? Any other questions? Okay, then, before us, I need a motion to approve or disapprove. Who would like to make a motion?
I can make it. I'll move to approve PO 938 to Innotex Protection in the amount of $28,178.25 for 15 sets of structural firefighter personal protective gear.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? All right.
Right.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion has been approved.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe the next item is going to be pulled from the agenda.
I'm sorry, it's going to be which?
Pulled from the agenda, the next item, item 3.
Let me pull it up right now.
Mr. Chair, this is the one we spoke of on the phone.
Yes, sir. I've got that here. It's, this item is the review and approval of the lease amendment with AT&T for Fire Station 4 generator access. And I understand that we are going to table this till next month or a later date. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's my recommendation, yeah.
Okay. Okay, with that said, then at this point in time, item number 3, D3 will be tabled until next month, and we can move on to the next item. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is discussion possible action status update of the strategic plan.
So, members of the board, what I'd like to do is give you a high-level overview of the strategic plan and some of the areas that were kind of popping out to me. You have the whole entire chart in front of you, so I welcome any questions you may have on any of those other sections. So, one of the things, just make sure we're all on the same page and that I understand this correctly, the purpose of the strategic plan is to set overall goals for SFD and develop a plan to achieve them. The strategic plan update is in your board packet. I'll highlight some of the issues, welcome questions on others, and then I'll like to ask that the board allow me some latitude for next month or for the next reporting time for this to propose a different way to provide this information to you. And what we may do is I may provide it in the same way that you have it right now, and then an alternative way, but trying to find a way to make sure that it's truly informing our decisions well, and isn't something that's just is kind of a very lengthy exercise that doesn't necessarily help keep us on task for those strategic goals. So more to follow on that.
How often have we asked you to inform us about how we're doing? Is it every 3 months?
It is. It's every 3 months.
Okay.
And I'm not, so just, philosophically, and I understand from Heidi's candid input that I maybe did a poor job, not maybe, that I did a poor job at the board meeting of explaining where I wanted to go with it. The other time, I got a little confusing, which will happen with me at times. But basically, what I'd like to do is make sure that when I'm telling y'all about what's going on with the different strategic plan items, that you understand how that affects us, how it ties back into the mission and how it ties back in. And I don't know that it necessarily does it in this format. So just looking to try to improve on that. I think a lot of the initiatives we have I think they're all very important, frankly. But some of them that are waiting for other things to get done, or that we've made trade-off choices. I don't know that the way that I present this to you, like the way I'm going to right now, necessarily informs you of those trade-offs. So then you're able to decide whether or not that trade-off is appropriate or not. Yes, sir.
Are you meaning that you're going to present it in a priority?
Yeah, I think a priority would be one of the ways, and the other thing would be if there's certain things that have to be required to accomplish a later goal, or if there's tasks that, hey, we could do it this way, and we could have this task done in 6 months, but if we do it this way, it'll take us a year to get it done, but it will allow us to do that other task in that 2-year task in half the time. You know, so we'll end up netting 6 months of savings by investing more in this. And I don't think that strategic chess pieces moving around is very well conveyed when we give it to you in this format. By the way, I appreciate Heidi's candor, even though she's like,
You know, Chief, I think just based on seeing the results to date of what we have or where we stand on it, I mean, we could read it, we could see it, and perhaps a summary, a brief summary as to percentage-wise or the feel or whatever your summary is going to be to sum up what we see rather than each individual point.
okay, I can totally get behind that. I can also see, you know, maybe summary relative to the goal, because even in the tasks, there are more task statements at the top of them than so our goal, this is when we're done. This is when and then you guys know, hey, how far are we, like ESO, like launch ESO. All right, that may sound like we're done, but that's probably 50% of the way done through ESO integration. So making sure that we're clear on those goals. And I like that. You know, percentage is certainly one way that it's relayed in other documents.
And still give us the latitude to ask questions and
Absolutely.
respond. So,
Sure.
okay.
So what I did here is I just highlighted some of the parts and pieces that were not green, because I figured that the ones that are green probably aren't, you know what they are. 1, 2, and 1, 3 talk about performance analysis and job analysis role. One of the things that I'd asked Kiona to look at is, you know, whether or not she could use some assistance from Employers Council to be able to accomplish this. When that number came back and I saw that it was still in the caution, hadn't been worked on yet. I get it, especially with the captain's test coming up, everything that's been going on. She's super busy. So she's reached out to him, and we're looking at some opportunities right now to have him come in there and do an audit of all of our HR practices. And I think it's timely, given that Kiona has just moved into that role recently, and to make sure that we are making sure that the high priorities are addressed first, so we don't have any surprises that end up cost the district or end up, you know, creating hardships for one of our employees. And through that, we can look at this job analysis part in those two. So those are still yellow, but we anticipate some movement on them in this quarter, I think, if Heidi and I can get together on that. So 3.1, the requisition process, ongoing. Gabe's thrown a lot of different things at us. Guys are coming on board, and we've got more coming, right, to continue to move on. But it's yellow because it's not fully implemented. But we're certainly with bill.com, yeah, and then with Bellwether, right? That's one of the other ones. Everything's moving towards better transparency, better integration, and all that stuff. 3.2, feasibility options, new medical software. So you'll see that that's red in your report. I think that's red because we're not going to go with anybody outside of ESO. So it was, looking at other third-party providers isn't anything right now. Chief Mazulis has been working to see how we can integrate the ESO's billing software component into the rest of our ESO suite. And that would, if in fact we're able to make that successful, that prevents that finger pointing that occurs whenever you have multiple vendors and they say, oh, that's not a problem on my side of the fence, that's a problem that came from the guy over here. So that's continuing to move forward, but we're not working on any external findings right now. Pull the GIS data, and I forgot what 6 was, so I forgot what that was subordinate to. You have 6 over there?
6s were.
Oh, the community hazard risk assessment, yeah. Wait, is that 6? Yeah. Oh, no, 2 more pages, please.
Which number are you on?
Well, that was John. So about collecting data. So the data is out being collected. We just don't have all the data back. So that's why that one's yellow. Collection is ongoing. Evaluate implementation of recommendations of the external professional. I should have, shame on me for not, no, it's okay if you just, this is even better. I should have put the top section on my little PowerPoint, then I know what it was about. So that's talking about integrating what we've been talking about during the chief's report about integrating the different ways that we're communicating with the public and taking those recommendations that we got from the previous contractor, vendor that we had that was doing public information, and finding out which one of those meet the public's needs and which ones we need to modify. So And since we still haven't figured it out yet, it's still yellow. Complete the development of the kernel partnership for human resources with NAU. That's ongoing. Complete the revamp of EMS consumable inventories. That's ongoing. Both those are in Chief Mazulis's wheelhouse.
I had a question about that, because it looked like you ran into a real roadblock there.
Which item
Chief
specifically?
Mazulis, it would be 9.2, it would be complete development of the kernel partnership for community resources with NAU, and then it says structure being developed in conjunction with NAH fell apart. Hoping the, something of Dr. Hart revitalizes this effort.
So the short story is we were meeting for about 8 months with the NAH Foundation and upper management at NAH, and that was about the same time we developed strategic plan, and the intent was to build what they termed the kernel, and we had purchased a software piece that would essentially allow our community paramedics or the folks on our apparatus, if they ran into a community member with a need, they could go to what we called the kernel, and it would resource out everything. And like I said, the foundation had purchased the software and started work on it. And then NAH restructured, and quite literally one day we stopped meeting, and when we dug, they just said we're going to go a different direction. And so since I built some really good partners with Manzanita Outreach, who does a lot of food appropriation for folks in the valley, Valley caregivers, and the outcome of these meetings is I made a lot of good partnerships with other agencies, and so we've now gone offline, and we want to keep the potential for shared resources going. It's just not formally guided with the NAH Foundation because they quit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Any other questions on those, on the 9s? Okay, so the 10.3 is working on hazard mapping, updating, get some of that stuff we're trying to do to inform where we should focus our efforts when it comes to risk management. While the shutdown significantly delayed any communication on that, one positive is that NEU is a postdoctoral candidate that's coming in that has offered to help us with figuring out some of the community's perception on risk and hazards around their community relative to wildfire. And so when she comes in here, I actually met her when I was at the International Association of Wildland Fire when I presented there. And she is going to let me know when she's in town, when she moves to NAU to finish her work. And she has the ability to help us with identifying some of those, some of the sentiment of the residents and what we can do to best inform their decisions when it comes to risk of wildfire. So that should be interesting. The engineer boot camp, it's a training that is specific to engineers developing the skills and competencies. Right now, the focus is on the captain's test and getting that moving forward, because that's the next big deal. And so the engineers test and focusing on that testing and developing those skills will occur after that. 11.3, the next one is follow the capital plan. I put that as caution because I don't understand it as well as I need to be able to say that it is that for the next 10 years that I'm 100% behind all the priorities. And there's Chief Pachura had a hold of that for a while. That moved around between the time when he left, and I can't speak well to it. So I put that as yellow until I can. So by next time it will be green. I'll make sure it's green for the next guy with a cool chart or gal. Let's see. So Carrie gave me paper, so that helps me a bunch here. The section 12, I put that whole section up there to work with. We talked before about the amount of effort that's being put into in the telecommunications section about them doing repairs and maintenance and everything. And so a lot of this work isn't getting done. I think after we get done with that HR assessment and look at where everything else is at, we'll be a good position to determine whether or not what the most appropriate use of that vacant position is, if it's what we thought it was, or if there's a better way to do that, and try to get some more help for the telecommunications so they can start moving forward these issues on a different speed. a lot of that analysis, aligning up the different tools that we use for analysis when it comes to software, and work with them from the very beginning to make sure that we're not creating additional hardships on them for how we have software that doesn't interface, things like that. That's also going to be a big help, and that's ongoing. And you know why this was identified ESO as something that became a higher priority, and it most certainly was a high priority with the cutover date. But involving them from the very beginning, I think, paid huge dividends in making sure that we understood what the limitations were, and we could minimize the impact on them, especially the surprises when it comes to the launching of it. I felt like it was one of the smoother launches of a software, especially compared to Telestaff, that we've had to date. And due in part because we kept telecom informed from the very beginning. So the 14 section that, 14.1 is still blank. It's continuing to be the Arizona State Park. There's still not another person for us. There's not a new person for us to meet with yet that's been identified as far as somebody that's permanent there. So until such time as there is, based on the fact that it hasn't worked well meeting with the interim people in the past 2 attempts at that, that's still on hold. So the funding mechanisms for capital, again, this is something that it says that we explore any and all available funding mechanisms. That's probably going to stay yellow forever, as long as that's the definition, because I'm not going to say that we've done it all, and that we've explored all of them, because there's probably something else out there that we haven't considered.
The selling of the tower leases as a possibility for income that's listed, what is, could you say a few words about that, please?
Just one time.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we've explored this in some other districts, and essentially the concept and the theory behind it is you take the tower leases that we have and we sell the rights to the tower and the leases. Ultimately, the way the contracts work, and some of them that I've seen go through is, the district still retains certain rights to the tower for its own purposes. But, essentially you take, the revenue potential for somebody else is much greater because that's what they do on a day in and day out. They negotiate these leases, they develop these leases. And so I don't have the exact number in front of me, so I can't speak to it. But I mean, the potential, revenue for selling of the tower leases is in the millions. We're talking significant amount of money that would take a significant amount of time of years for the district to recover. But it is one of those rather kind of complex things, and takes a lot of time and discussion and deliberation on.
Sedona Airport sold their towers for $750,000 because they were in a real financial box. They've been since criticized for having done that, but at the time it looked like it was a savior.
Right, and you've got to evaluate that. You've got to evaluate, how much revenue is going to come in from the sale versus what's your long-term revenue potential, to evaluate all those things and see if it does make sense. I mean, fortunately, we wouldn't be making that decision from a position of being in a bind. It'd be a position of strength to be able to make that decision, so.
Okay, so the next thing on here is section 17 accreditation. So again, the analysis stuff that I talked about before, that would all build towards accreditation, but until we get some of those base pieces in, like we start collecting data in a manner that starts the clock on that 5 years of good data, we get all the policies and everything lined up, start lining those up, pushing the button to say that we're ready to start the actual accreditation process, which has a timeline associated with it. We're not there yet. We'll continue to inform you on that. And ideally, one of the things that I can commit to as a goal is that by the time we get to the end of this budget year, we'll have identified a way to begin the analysis in a meaningful manner that meets their standards, so we can start that clock. And that's going to be the first step. And then we're starting to collect the good data, and in the way that they want it. So
I think it would help me, Heavy, to understand the broad categories of seeking that accreditation.
sure. Yeah, if you like, I could, if the board wishes that at the next board meeting, I could break that down into where the different standards are covered and everything, and like what the data is that we need to do that. And there's actually a module, it's called FOAM, it's a Fire Operations Assessment Module, but there's that some of the analytics look at that. I can explain to you why each one of those are important for us to collect as they tie back into the
Is there something
accreditation.
online that you could go online and see what the accreditation process?
Yeah, there is, but I tell you what, it's a heavy, super boring lift. Yeah, I think I could, especially relative to the analytics part of it, it would be something that we could
I think it'd
talk
be
about in a
nice
board
to
meeting.
have you, on the, whenever it will work for you time-wise to present that to the board.
Well, I think it wouldn't be too big of a deal because identifying those is essential to us, making sure that we get the right analytics package. So it's kind of part and parcel. So sharing that information with the board would be something I'd be happy to do.
There's no rush.
Chief, is there a way to correlate those items on the strategic plan on the graph as presented, or perhaps the one that you propose to present, that are directly related or affected to the accreditation process?
There isn't. So I was looking with Visio because in my mind, if I'm trying to explain a decision process and I can't draw it out with boxes and arrows between it, then I've introduced ambiguity that somebody else, because there's not a decision then if you can't follow the dots, just like an algorithm, and so I think there's certain ways that we could do that where it says like, hey, we're going to do this piece. These 5 things need to be done. And then they truncate into this, and then we're at this point in accreditation, and then that gets us to here, and then that gets us to here. Yeah, that's a good idea because that would help me. Visual things like that make it easier for me to figure it out than lists of words.
So it's not that tree that goes in.
I hope not. I hope not. I'll try to do better than that. So that's the accreditation part, and then I think there's just a couple more. Oh, lexical. This is another one of those things that Kiona just updated the employee handbook. We're still moving forward. Chief Mazulis has been moving forward on stuff with the training division in Lexipol. I think John, have you guys moved a couple things forward? Is that accurate? Yeah. So there's work being done on there. There's still a lot of work to be done. One of the things when we're talking to the auditors, which I actually enjoyed my conversation with the auditor, which I thought was weird, but talking about the different risk decisions and everything was some of the different ways to make sure that as we're incorporating all this policy, that we line it up with their best practices, and so it reflects in policy the stuff that that we say is important and the stuff that Gabe knows is important. So we're still working to put all that together, and again, that's a big deal, making it all line up. But
And Lexipol is the attempt to put everything electronic,
yeah,
from manuals to putting it online or digital.
yeah, I thought it was the easy button when I first heard that it was, and it's exactly that. It's everything formatted the same way. They bring something very valuable to the table. Is they make sure that you have covered all your bases when it comes to any of the applicable legal requirements, but it's just as hard as making a policy book from scratch. It's just making it scratch in their template that follows all the rules. So it's better, but it's not easier.
Could be sources for promotion, questions on promotional.
Yeah. Would make anybody that wants to test fill out one whole section. But you're right. Chief Mazulis, you have something?
I was just for me to wrap my head around Lexipol. It's a standard. Every fire department, district, police organization has to have the same policies for the most part. I mean, and in any organization over decades, some policies are written for a person. This guy or gal did this, so we got to write a policy against it. So at Sedona Fire, we had a lot of really good policy, but a lot of it's over personalized to our organization. And as we have to update that stuff and untangle the personalization and make it not canned, but make it fit federal, state, and local standards, Lexipol gives us the tool they take care of that part of it, and then we plug in our name and our specifics to this area where, for me with EMS, we'd plug in some specifics about drug box control, whereas there's standards, but then we have some specifics because of our medical director. So it's a really good tool, and it's a really good product. It's just doing the line by line so that when you're done, there's not any rework. We just turn one off and turn the other on. And so being thoughtful about the transition so that we don't have a bunch of rework to do.
Who's we?
Quite honestly, everybody. Each, I think Heidi and Chief Coyle and I and Fire Marshal Davis has taken on kind of divisional pieces, and then I distribute the training specific ones to our training officer, and then we filter those out to different people, and then we've had the opportunity with some light duty folks to train them on the process, and because there's a lot of move this to this on 2 computer screens and then hit save and then have somebody look at it stuff. That's just time consuming. And so we're using every opportunity we can to get it going, but it's just being thoughtful about it so that you don't have to go back and, because if you over personalize it or over organizationalize it, then you have to unwind that. So just really going piece by piece and make sure we align with the standards. And the payoff will be huge, because then we'll have a system that is not organizationalized. It's based on standard. So.
Gotcha, thank you.
And the references between each other is the other big deal, because your policies reference different policies and making sure you get all that cleaned up. So, the next thing was a telestaff. So the telestaff upgrade. I think we've had decent movement in the last month. I have written the most strongly worded email I think I've ever, professional email I've sent in the time I've been here to try to get those guys to do what they committed to do, and copied everybody in their organization that I could find that might have had some influence. And something, maybe it was me, maybe the guy just decided finally our project manager is going to start moving on things, but it's been going really well. And Brian Espiau, he was an engineer. He has kept it moving and has kept him on task and has tracked every little bug and every little nuance in that system to make sure that they don't say, oh yeah, that's done. Yeah, like payroll, that payroll thing's done. No, it still doesn't do X, Y, Z. And on this date, you told me it was, God bless him, because all I did was get grumpy with him, but he's the one that's been doing all the heavy lifting to make sure that all the pieces are moved together. So it's, but I really think that we're getting close. So hopefully I'll have some really good news by next month. We're ready to test it. And then, so evaluate electronic content. We have SharePoint. That's basically our main, it's where we go to find information. It's supposed to be, it's our internal website. Intraweb, is that a word? I don't know, but
It's your wiki.
it's our wiki. Yeah, it's awful. It is so hard to find things on. It's a mess. We could, and so part of this whole lining stuff up is that instead of getting another program and making it, well, first we're going to fix this. We're going to make this as good as it can be and decide if that's good enough or if that's not good enough. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. I made a joke, and I don't think I said it for y'all, but the next guy that breaks himself on duty, he's going to become very good at SharePoint, because there's all sorts of just moving all the files and getting the names right and figuring out where everything is, and it will help the Lexipol stuff, because they did their data mining of it to provide a lot of the background for us, and there's things they missed that we knew were in there, but it didn't come up in their queries because the way we have it set up, it was everybody's bright idea to make a new folder and to name it something, and it needs some work. So that's why that's yellow.
Okay.
So in summary, and I couldn't get the colors to line up. I don't even know why. 44 items are green, 26 items are yellow, or 2 items are red. So, that Alan Malahi video, I know the colors don't match. We talked about Ford, about saying when something was broke, and that would be my commitment to y'all, is that if it's not working, I'll tell you. If it's something that we think we're off track on, I'll tell you. And hopefully we'll have more greens and reds, but maybe there's going to be, sometimes we won't. So, and maybe the colors won't match. All right. Is there any questions on the update on the strategic plan?
Just a comment going way back to that vendor that failed to respond.
Yes, sir. Yep.
It would seem to me, I'm not telling you how to run the show, but it would just seem to me that if a vendor doesn't respond in X period of time, you look for another vendor.
Yeah, and I would have in a heartbeat. They kind of have us. They have us over a barrel big time with telestaff, because the company at the bottom called Kronos it has all of the different workforce tracking stuff that aligns with anything that's shift work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the project manager, he has bosses, and we finally figured out who those were, and frankly, it's wasting their time. I mean, why would you want to stay on a project that long? This is supposed to be done last July. It hasn't cost us any more money, but it's cost us a lot more headache, for sure. Yeah. All right.
Chief,
Sir, no.
but I appreciate your analytic approach to this whole thing. And it's looking at things slightly different than what we have been in the past. Not that that was any worse or any better, but it's just different. And it allows us to get a better picture and a better feel of where we're at and where we're going and how long it may take to get there. So I truly appreciate your commitment to this and getting things to green. if
I
you
appreciate
will.
that.
So, thank you.
You bet. Happy to do it.
Okay. With that said, any other comments or questions for the chief? Okay. Next item on the agenda is a board member item, and it is a discussion, possible action on the update on the fire chief hiring process. And I believe Chief Coyle, that'll be you also.
That'll be me again.
It's your night.
It is my night for sure. Yeah. Between now and last Thursday, you guys can get tired of hearing me. So this is pretty small, but I just did this so I could reference it for where we're at, and to kind of show what I was trying to get at here was that there's a lot of different phases of this, and there's a complexity here that I think is probably greater than would be appreciated if you just said we're going to go hire a chief. It seems like you put a wanted ad in and or help wanted ad and there you go. So one of the biggest parts of it, and it's a lot of the work is present in that job description in front of you, is going to make sure that we have valid measures that we're using to hire, because those measures through what they call a job analysis includes everything that's used to develop performance metrics for that individual, to develop the tests to perform the assessment centers to make sure you get the right individual, and it all starts with that job analysis. A lot of front end work, and then things kind of build from there, and build more quickly, I think. So that's all the phases, but what I want to do is talk about the job analysis. What we're doing is, so we conducted the analysis, and we basically followed the EOC, and it has a thing called the Uniform Guide for Employee Selection Practices. So the work we've been doing is consistent with that, which reduces our exposure to any sort of legal challenges down the road. Reviewed the background information that came in from a bunch of different like-size agencies to see if there's anything there. Dr. Davis reviewed a bunch of our board meetings. Go through this to kind of see if there's any nuggets that he pulled out of there that we didn't talk about. The pass on and stuff that I had with Chief Hayes, and there was also some of the information that was used. And then you got SMEs to analyze the work. So that body of SMEs, try to look at it from above, from below, from sideways. So that included represent from each one of the labor groups, 2 members of the board, myself, Heidi, and Kiona. So that was the group that sat there, and Carrie too, and because she gets to see behind the curtain more than anybody else probably, and labored over getting the list of tasks and everything together. And then those task statements were reviewed, and along with the competencies. So the task statements are you could type 56 words a minute, that'd be a task. The competencies are making sure that you can communicate effectively in a manner that doesn't alienate your audience or something like that. It's a little softer skill, but the old job descriptions would always have KSAOs, they call it knowledge, skills, ability, and other attributes. Competencies tend to have a more strategic nature to them, because they'll apply to multiple different tasks. So if you're trying to get somebody that is a good communicator or has good social intelligence, it's hard to say somebody has good social or emotional intelligence. You really need to pull out what does that mean? What's that competency look like? And so that's why the list is so long, because those attributes are significant. And frankly, right now Sedona's I believe we're in a really good spot organizationally about making sure that we have the right kind of lists and the right kind of descriptions out there, that we're not trying to hurry up and get somebody because we need somebody here right now. We want to add somebody to our team. I want to only do one of my jobs, but we can wait longer if that's what it takes to get the right person. And so I think this approach kind of also sends that message. And there's been a lot of outreach that's been taking place just from people coming in and talking to us and seeing what's going on. And I think the more we are, whether it's parts of the strategic plan or everything else, but set that vision and that clarity moving forward, it actually is almost like its own kind of advertising for the right person. Because if what we're doing aligns with the board's expectations, and then they see that, and then they're like, all right, can I, is that what I want to do?
Chief, along those lines, are you saying the outreach that's coming in, is that from people who are possibly interested in applying?
Some of it's been that, and then some of it's been just kind of creating a buzz, I think, about the different stuff that we've been doing. But there was, I would imagine the chief from Glendale that chose to sit through the whole day of stuff down here, he must have an interest. Or-
Teaser.
Yeah, that was hardcore right there. So the SMEs, the reason I bring up the part about the SME involvement is because that's how you develop the validated list, and that's how you kind of steel yourself against the scrutiny that might come from any legal battles. So as we're looking through that list, we ask for comments. When it comes to the task statements and the competencies, those things will comments are welcome, but for any changes to be made, that'll be brought back through that group to make sure we maintain the validity of the process. But certainly your comments are welcome. And then, so what we did with the task statements, just is after they first came out, then we aggregate them together. The scores, anything below 2.0 on the scale that we provided, was dropped from it. And then a lot of what took place was just combining them, because there's nuggets of each one that different people liked, and we realized that we could reduce those down into certain things. The competencies, I'm not even gonna, I'll be happy to, but the 67 competencies, the way those were developed was a years-long, highly complex process. So that's why that list began with. And
How many did we get those down to? Are there
48, I think, or something like that.
not
It was
bad.
quite a few, yeah. Yeah, but but the thing is, you didn't, I guess the important thing to say there is that we didn't start with 67 arbitrary things. We started with 67 things that were developed because as leaders that are expected to have a strategic vision, these are the skill sets that they need. So when we're trying to hire for that person, it makes sense that you can have a lot of those. Whereas if we would have just went with this thing called ONET that has all these different competencies for every position, from bottle washer on up to I don't know, to Bill Gates, then you would have a whole bunch more competencies. Would have dropped a lot of them out. But these were specific to leaders, to those C-suite kind of people that have to have that strategic vision. And the ones we dropped off primarily dropped off because they had something to do with a for-profit entity versus the ones that were closely worded but were more of a service-oriented position. Yes, sir.
For the committee, whoever's on the committee, the pages are not numbered, but I'm looking at something called managerial courage. And there's a dangling sentence that leaves me questioning what it says. It's starting, it is not afraid to take negative action when necessary, quickly and nothing.
That's funny because that's one of those we edited before because it sounded a little caustic in that particular one. And Heidi's got it though, so we'll get back to Dr. Davis and fix that. Thank you.
That's only one that
We'll send you a good
found.
draft
I read 'em
with
all.
a sentence that makes sense in it.
And then, of course, on the next page, under priority setting, it says quickly focuses on the important issues and puts trivial, MAASIDE. I think it trivial aside, I think it should say probably. Trivial matters aside, okay.
Before I sent that out, it was in an older PDF version, and I took it to Word and then converted it.
Good catch.
So I might have, if that font was different, I might have jacked it all up. If anybody else has the other typos, we'll address it, but I'll also make sure I didn't screw it up by trying to be helpful. I should ask Carrie to do that, because she
Can I,
fixed the
make a
last thing.
comment?
Sure,
Is this thing on?
it is.
So I just wanted to say I'm really glad to see that we went to a bachelor's degree as a requirement as opposed to master's, because we would be cutting so many qualified candidates out of the process. Because I thought we were going to be going for master's degree.
Yeah. So, Joy, I thought we were too. I could tell you the truth. I can't remember what we.
It doesn't read that way.
Yeah,
It just
I think we
says
said desirable, huh?
Yeah, master's degree is
minimum.
preferred.
Preferable.
at the very end.
That's
Not
how-
at the
yeah.
very end.
Right.
But it says a bachelor's degree, and it lists various things you could major in.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a time to bring, that's under the minimum qualifications
Right.
section. Would this
Mm-hmm.
be a time to bring up more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. Because unfortunately, there's not, the way the system works, there's not much
Yeah.
time to get input from everybody. So that's why I wanted to make sure you had the draft and we could get it from,
Because on that one, on the minimum qualifications, I was one of the people that did want to see a master's degree preferred, because I think it's become more common for people to have them in higher positions. But anyway, this is how it reads. But there was something that did concern me. It said, with 5 years of fire administration experience, and I was concerned about that. In parentheses, it says from finance or human resources, risk and fire prevention. My concern is that, I would like to see somebody with operational experience. I would like to see our new fire chief have operational experience and not come from parts of admin, where perhaps it's a assistant chief of admin who didn't come up through the ranks of firefighting.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that.
okay, I understand. Go ahead, Mr.
I pulled this from an interview with Brunacini. And Brunacini responded to a question and about an applicant. And so he was sort of asking the question before answering it. Should the applicant have experienced a steady, upwardly mobile profile through all aspects of fire service? And so that talks about the individual who enters the fire service and has experience at each and every level, and so on, therefore gaining on the experience through those years into the manager's position, and so on, constantly being upwardly mobile and getting to the position of a fire chief. That isn't where it stops.
Gotcha. I can appreciate that, and I think, Corey, to your point, is that one of the things we struggled with was the fact that saying that somebody has to be a fire chief or the deputy fire chief. There's not, at least in Arizona, you can be a fire chief of a very small organization or larger, and the title doesn't really relay it. If there's operational experience requirements, in my mind, the best thing to do would be for us to identify what those may be, and then look at just identifying them as such. You know what I mean? 'Cause not just have it hinge on a word, but and perhaps it's like Mr. McCarthy said, we're just someone's progressed through the ranks, or have you say that?
Sure. Well, my concern about the way it's worded right now is that somebody could apply who has no operational experience.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
I would prefer someone that did. And then secondly, and then it goes into talking about somehow experience, emergency response and wildland fire experience. And my concern with that is that I just don't know the percentage of people, of districts or municipalities that deal with wildland. I'm worried that there could be an exceptional leader who doesn't have wildland experience because he or she comes from an urban area or just an area that doesn't have wildland. So I hate to see, people might not apply if they don't have wildland fire experience.
I can appreciate that as well. That you're concerned it may limit the applicant pool
Yes.
by having that noted as such.
Could we do an and
Unless,
or?
has it been deemed that that's critical to who we choose as a chief? Or-
Well, I think I can present you guys two different scenarios. One is that as the fire chief of the Sedona Fire District, our organizational structure is such that you'll have an operations chief. And that person would, in my mind, have to have that knowledge, especially in our, because that's one of the top 3 threats that we deal with. Whether, as a board, you feel like they need to have, that the chief needs to have that level of experience, or if they have to be good at, I mean, so is it a nuclear submarine where you got to know how to fix everything on it if you're going to be the captain of that boat? Or is it, something, are you the CEO of a company where you just have to be really good at being a CEO or some hybrid therein? And, that's something that, I think now's a great time to kind of
I think
game out.
understanding the urban interface And those other agencies, be they state or federal, what have you, that a chief has to interact with prior to an incident.
Understood.
I think those skills and what have you in dealing with, you know, with those folks is highly important.
You know, Chief, if I can interact there, again, looking at what we have developed here to this point in time is such that it is the job analysis and the job description. Certainly, anybody who's going to apply for this is a chief of sorts and has that experience, whether it's operational or administrative. This is an administrative position, without doubt. And for that person to have the team around him or her, thereby accomplishing those things, whether it's operational experience in one avenue or the other, is what your operations chief would be running. That operations chief is, generally speaking, that person that runs operations. Makes sense, right? Fire chief is that person that's got to be skilled in all areas and not in any one area in particular. And I think this reflects that. And it's quite lengthy, and I think it addresses all those points. There is credence to what Corey states, as does Gene and Joy. But I think that again, we can't lose sight of specific particulars at this point in the game. That will come when we get to the next phase. That this allows us that latitude to say if one has a master's versus one has a bachelor's, yet the bachelor's perhaps presents better than the one with the master's. We have a decision to make. But with all things being equal, you know, the master's would be preferred. So we have to take these things into consideration. But to this point in time, I think we got a good foundation for what we're trying to build.
I think this is brilliant.
And,
Yeah, I agree.
and I can tell you that I guarantee Dr. Davis is going to be watching this whole exchange, and so this is good dialogue because it's going to help us make sure that I communicate that effectively when we meet again. So,
Gotcha, thank you.
Al, did you have
What
something?
is the timeline for this to be a completed document ready to roll?
All depends on how many edits we do. So, but by Sunday, I'd ask that everybody that has comment, members of the board and then the members of the Chief Selection Committee, provide those comments, and then we will synthesize those and then move something forward with recommendations and rationale behind that. And then assuming that we can get that approved, there's some work that needs to be done on determining what the starting wages are. It's going to require some board, and then what the compensation package looks like. So, soon we're going to have to address that issue, which maybe that was that one thing that may end up being a special meeting. But we want to make sure that we got all this stuff done up to the point where we decide whether it needs to be a special meeting, or if we're a week away from the next regular scheduled board meeting, then we'll just agendize that and then get y'all's input on how to move that forward. And frankly, I need to get with Mr. Whittington, find out when you're talking about salary and those benefits for a job description, does that, where does that fit in the proper way to agendize that?
But we can't post it till we have that, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So,
And, go ahead. Yeah, there's one more thing I wanted to bring.
have at it.
Okay. The last thing is, at the very end of this really wonderful document, it says residency within the district is expected within 6 months of appointment. And I was hoping to see is required as opposed to expected. But also what I'm understanding this says is within 6 months, the person should reside within the district. And typically in corporate situations, you may be offered the job and accept it, but then not start the job for 2 months. And I think that would be the case for most of our applicants, because they have to give notice and they're under some requirement of notice. Like our former chief was under requirement of a 60-day notice. So what I want to say is, I would think by the time they start working here, they should be required to live here. I'm not sure why there's a 6-month delay in that.
I do know that some of the conversations that occurred during the chief selection were about the cost of living in Sedona and the fact that a residency requirement may be impactful to the number of qualified applicants that we get. So, you know, that's one of those attempts, I think, to try to meet the intent without making it as impactful. I can appreciate what you're saying about the fact that, you know, there's at least a corporate culture where it's a very different standard. And honestly, I mean, I think that's open to you know, the board to provide input on how they would expect that to work.
I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is I thought in our committee meeting, because this was handled towards the end of our committee meeting, that there was pretty much agreement that it would be highly valuable to have a person live in the district.
I believe that was a consensus,
Yeah.
although
So
I'm
I
not
was
sure what the
surprised
timeline
to
was.
see it lightened up here a bit, that requirement.
But is that a reflection, the 6 months, of the reality of finding the right place to call home? I mean, if, in the meantime, you might have to live somewhere temporarily until you can find that right property. I mean, look at the problems the city's had with some of their key employees not finding residence and deciding they don't want the job.
With the case with our prior chief, I believe he had temporary residency twice, that he moved from one rental three times before he found a home that he could purchase. So if the committee or the board here feels that 6 months is too long and immediately is almost unattainable, is somewhere in the middle something that we ought to consider, something like more of a 90-day versus, you know.
Just to keep in mind, residency doesn't mean owning a home.
No, right, then that was my point.
Yeah, it can mean renting.
Which means we could bring down and shorten that time down to 0 to something in between the two.
that
Can
might
I-
be good.
Mr. Soto,
Yeah.
if, as a point of reference, and I haven't seen the language as it relates to fire chiefs, but there is legislation being introduced right now by the Professional Firefighters of Arizona that is pushing to eliminate the mandate for residency requirements. So I don't know where that's going, but just so you're aware of it, you know.
I think that's based on our US Constitution, and not restricting people's movement. And with reference to corporate, oftentimes corporate has a program built within corporations when they have you to relocate and so on. We don't have that capability.
Well, that's true, and can I speak as a realtor, and someone that's lived here for quite a long time? In Asheville, North Carolina, as well as Raleigh, there's many issues with the firefighters not being able to live in the area that they work because of the cost of living. And I feel that the 6 month is adequate because our rental market is extremely tight, and it has been for about 4 years. It's very hard to find somewhere to rent. And this next year, our housing prices are gonna level off. So it's gonna be a chore for someone to find a place to live to fulfill that resident requirement. And I think 6 months is an adequate amount of time. I don't think it's excessive just due to our inventory, which is low. So, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. You know, as we look at this and we discuss it, any fire chief that we, you know, select is going to be coming from out of the area. And they're going to have to land somewhere pretty doggone close to come to work. And given that, plus the fact if we provide a time period in which they have to live here, they're not going to be that far out. So whether it is a distance requirement or a time period, you know, as long as we have something in there. And again, maybe 6 months to me personally is a little bit long. 3 months may be better. Initially, upon seating on your first day of work would be the best, but what's the reality of that?
Right.
So,
And it is, right? It's all about those trade-offs. Is like, if we put 3 months in and that we don't know, but and that eliminates certain candidates, maybe we're the right candidates that would have taken the job for 6 months, and I don't know, some of that, I don't know, we'd ever know it until, we just never probably would, actually. But
and I think the community as a whole is looking forward to having a chief also live within our district. So it's, you know, it's again, it's nice to know that they're hoping for that. And again, it's us, this board that makes that decision, but that is in the back of our mind. We are aware of that.
So would if it would meet with the board's approval, then what I could do is talk to Dr. Davis about what he sees as the consequence of reducing it from 6 months to 3 months. And then,
And also substituting the word required for expect, I'm worried that expected gives
little ambiguity
a
there.
little, ambiguity and leeway.
That's true. Yeah, required is definitely more of a thou shalt word than, yeah. Certainly, so I could provide that information.
And is finance with Gabe also going to be part of the discussion as far as establishing salary range? Or are we just going to,
Well, so there's the way that there's studies where you determine internal and external pay equity that you could do. Otherwise, it's really a decision on, so if we have a range and we choose to to advertise it at the range that currently exists, then there's two different ways, well, there's probably more than two, but there's two different ways to word that. Is you could say that starting salary, say, is in the bottom half of the range from step 1 to step 3, and the overall pay range is from step 1 to step 7. That's one way. Or you say that the pay range is from step 1 to step 7. Sometimes when you say the pay range is the whole thing, then it sends a wrong message where somebody comes in and wants to negotiate for step 7 right off the bat. And if that's not the board's intent to allow that, then we want to just make sure that we have the proper verbiage in there that aligns with what the board's intent is. Does that sound about right?
Sounds good.
yeah, thank you. Is that it, Chief, on the update?
I think so. Let me see. So this is all the different parts that were in your email. So, and then, yeah, it is. I think one last thing I just kind of wanted to say for the record is that as we move through this process, now once we determine what the job description looks like, then we'll have the competencies that are the ones that we are going to be able to incorporate within the selection process, and there will be opportunities for the board to engage with stakeholders, both professionals from other organizations, fire chiefs, professionals from other federal and state agencies nearby here that have a vested interest in this, and then members of the community as they choose to have those individuals participate in the process. So, but this job analysis is a lot of work. It's a lot of nerdy work on the front end, but it creates the right frame.
Yeah, without a
And
doubt.
so that's the goal of this section. So, and that is everything.
Thank you very much, Chief, for that update. Last item on our agenda is our fire marshal's message.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the house fire that we had on Sanborn Drive, we stress to people the importance of closing your doors when you go out, close your doors at night when you sleep. Probably the most important thing that you can do if there's a fire in your house is to compartmentalize it and keep it confined to the room of origin for as long as possible. And I've seen lots of examples of this, but this fire on Saturday was the best example of just the amount of damage in the one room. Even though those internal doors, those hollow core doors in your house, they don't last long, but it confined that fire to the room of origin for the duration, and it didn't leave that room. So I talked to the homeowner, and she was more than happy to allow us to use the pictures that we took for public education and for training our guys. And so we're gonna put together something like that. But it's important. Sleep with your doors closed when you leave on vacation. When you leave the house, try to keep the doors closed as much as possible. It made a huge difference in this case.
Out of curiosity, did the fire go out the window and lap?
No, all the windows, the internal panes had broken, but the external panes were still intact. And with that door closed, and it consumed all the oxygen in there and kept that fire in check
Is that
until we
what
could
kept
get
the
there.
fire? Is that there was nothing?
Yeah, it basically consumed all of the oxygen in the room, and although it didn't completely snuff the fire, it kept it small enough, and I'm assuming there was probably just enough oxygen coming underneath the door that it kept it burning, but it didn't allow it to grow like a normal fire.
Super. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation and your input. It was a highly informative meeting, and although it was a little bit lengthy, it went by fast. So with that said, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Bill, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and shut her down. Okay, good
Before
night.
everybody leaves, I need
Yes.
signatures on a signature